Chapter 1014. Hua Wuxia, the strongest heaven's pride of the Hua family. Third on the sword list. Third heaven of the divine dwelling realm. Seventh class heaven's pride, with the sacred light and darkness constitution, and 2 sword daos. All kinds of legends were added to his body, causing him to be covered in a layer of dazzling halo. It could be said that Hua Wuxia was one of the most famous heaven's prides of the Sword Dynasty. Some people thought that his strength was enough to compete for the position of Jiankui. What was even more commendable was that although Hua Wuxia had the halo of a heaven's pride, he was neither arrogant nor rash. This could be seen from the fact that he did not attack Yi Guqin immediately. Hua Wuxia was a person who could keep his composure, and was very shrewd. It was only now that Yi Guqin had revealed his true strength that Hua Wuxia decided to attack. He had absolute confidence in dealing with Yi Guqin. Hua Wuxia, you finally can't hold back anymore. Yi Guqin's gaze stopped on Hua Wuxia. His position was destined to be on the opposite side of Hua Wuxia. Dugawu Bai, your strength is indeed beyond everyone's expectations. I didn't expect you to have 3 sword daos, but if you think that you can defeat all the heaven's prides of the 5 great academies of the Sword Dynasty, then you're a little arrogant. Hua Wuxia put his hands behind his back, his expression calm. I'm not being arrogant, but the truth. Yi Guqin retorted. Well, I'll let you see what the truth is. Hua Wuxia slowly raised his hand, and a long sword as blazing as the sun fell into his hand. It was the sword of light of the twin swords of light and shadow. They're going to attack. Are they finally going to start the final collision? The entire sword battle square, and even the entire Sword Emperor city, was now the focus of attention. If Yi Guqin wanted to win the final 5 academies tournament, the biggest obstacle was naturally Hua Wuxia. If Hua Wuxia could defeat Yi Guqin, the championship would naturally fall to him. This battle could be said to be the most important battle to determine the champion of the 5 academies tournament. Everyone's heart was pounding. Wuxia, you must destroy that little bastard. Hua Yuntao said coldly in his heart. The rest of the pseudo-saint families were also unwilling to see Yi Guqin win. On the other side, people from Tianxian College and Sacred Cliff College were praying for Yi Guqin. Brother Yi, you must win. Saber 9 mumbled to himself in the sky. If Yi Guqin could win the championship, it would be a great boost to the itinerant cultivators. Even in the future battle for the Sword Sun, it would be of great benefit. In the Sword Dynasty, I haven't really had a hearty battle. Hua Wuxia, do you have the ability? Yi Guqin held the 9-dragon thunder prison, and the sound of his sword was pleasant to the sky. As you wish. Hua Wuxia took a step forward, and his sword swept across the sky. His figure seemed to turn into a ray of light, rushing straight to the sky, and his sword was pointed at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin's arm shook, and the sound of his sword was like the roar of a dragon, shaking the sky. Rumble. Dark clouds rolled in the sky, and thunder shook the world. Torrential rain fell from the sky. It was as if they were witnessing the ultimate duel between the 2 swordsmen. The 2 figures collided directly, and a loud clang sounded, as if hundreds of millions of divine weapons were clashing. The entire Sword Emperor city was enveloped by this extremely loud collision. Everyone could hear the ear-shattering trembling sound in their ears. Clang, clang, clang. Sword shadows were everywhere, and sword chi soared into the sky. The 2 people instantly clashed in the sky. The sword edge cut through the rain, as if splitting the curtain of rain in half. Sword of light daybreak. Hua Wuxia's sword swept out. The blazing sword light was like the light of daybreak, and with incomparably sharp sword chi, it pierced towards Yi Guqin's chest. Divine sword lightning controlling art, myriad lightning transformations. Yi Guqin's sword vibrated, and 9-colored lightning burst out from the sword, as if it had turned into thousands of lightning snakes, and swept out. Rumble. Lightning illuminated the sky, and sword light illuminated the world. Hua Wuxia's body shook, and the aura of the 3rd layer of the divine dwelling completely erupted. Powerful chi poured into the sword of light, and he slashed down at Yi Guqin. Sword of light, sunset. The mighty chi seemed to have turned into a magnificent sunset, but it also contained a fatal danger. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed, and he once again displayed the ultimate killing move of the divine sword lightning controlling art, divine thunder heaven summoning. The lightning in the sky fused with 9-colored lightning, and it swept out with a loud rumble. Boom. In this extreme collision, Yi Guchen's figure was blasted back hundreds of feet, and a sword wound so deep that bone could be seen appeared on his shoulder. Dugu Wubai is injured, some people exclaimed. Dugu Wubai is at a disadvantage because of his cultivation level, and coupled with the previous consumption, it's normal that he can't beat Hua Wuxiu, some experts analyzed. Indeed, in everyone's view, Yi Guchen's ability to compete with the heaven prides of the divine dwelling stage with Tiandi Lingqiao's strength was already amazing enough. But against Hua Wuxiu, who was at the third layer of the divine dwelling stage, it was still a little difficult. The advantage in cultivation level, coupled with Yi Guchen's previous consumption, led to the current situation. Not good. On the Sacred Cliff College side, Beixian Elder and the others had ugly expressions. Although they knew that Yi Guchen's chances of successfully passing the one-man against 1,000-men challenge were very slim, but there was still a glimmer of hope in their hearts, and they hoped that a miracle would happen. But it seemed that the situation was not good for Yi Guchen. Master. Mu Xingzu's heart was also in her mouth. But unlike the others, Mu Xingzu had absolute faith in Yi Guchen. After all, her master was someone who had fought a bloody battle with Di Haotian. Although Hua Wuxiu was not weak, there was still a big gap between him and Di Haotian. Yi Guchen was not even afraid of Di Haotian, so how could he be afraid of Hua Wuxiu? Come on, master. Mu Xingzu opened her small mouth and shouted desperately. Huh? So what if you shout? Against Hua Wuxiu, Dugu Wubai won't be able to turn the tables. Some of Yi Guchen's enemies sneered. Boom, boom, boom. The collision in the sky continued. Yi Guchen's figure was knocked back again and again, and blood flowed out of his mouth. On the other hand, Hua Wuxiu was much calmer. Dugu Wubai, is this your strength? Hua Wuxiu's face was calm, and there was a trace of disappointment. Hearing this, many Sacred Cliff College disciples clenched their fists. In their view, if Yi Guchen had not fought with Shangguan Jingshan and the others, he would not have been suppressed. Ah, Hua Wuxiu, is this your strength? Yi Guchen's face did not show the slightest frustration. Instead, his eyes were deep. Hua Wuxiu felt that something was wrong. But a moment later, Hua Wuxiu frowned slightly. Are you measuring my strength? Hua Wuxiu said coldly. What do you think? Yi Guchen's lips curved into a sneer. Indeed, from an outsider's point of view, Yi Guchen was in a state of being suppressed. But his real intention was to use this to measure Hua Wuxiu's true strength, as well as the increase in combat power brought about by his third layer of the divine dwelling realm. And now, Yi Guchen had a better understanding of Hua Wuxiu's strength. So next. Hua Wuxiu, the show has just begun. Yi Guchen suddenly made a hand seal. A terrifying devouring force was released from his body. In an instant, the sky changed color. Yi Guchen seemed to have turned into the eye of the storm, and the surrounding spiritual qi was all absorbed by him. The heaven-devouring secret technique, erupt. Chapter 10-15. The sky-devouring secret art, as one of the top 10 ancient secret arts, had always been Yi Guchen's trump card. It was also his best method to make up for his lack of cultivation level. Although Yi Guchen had not completely mastered the sky-devouring secret art, he had at least reached the first level. The first level could ignore the bottleneck of one's cultivation level, and allow Yi Guchen's power to soar by 3 cultivation levels. At this moment, Yi Guchen displayed the sky-devouring secret art, as if he had become the center of the world. An endless amount of spiritual energy was absorbed by it. What kind of secret art is that? I don't know. Dugu Wubai still has such a method? All the cultivators present were shocked by Yi Guchen's method. Hua Wuxiu also revealed a look of surprise, and then his face darkened. In the perception of everyone present, Yi Guchen's cultivation level soared. 8th level of the Heaven and Earth Spirit Bridge. 9th level of the Heaven and Earth Spirit Bridge. Divine Dwelling Stage. Boom. When Yi Guchen's aura broke through to the Divine Dwelling Stage, the surrounding space rippled. Yi Guchen held the 9-dragon thunder prison in his hand, his black hair fluttering in the wind. He was like a divine king that had undergone nirvana, and his pressure was astonishing. With the power of the sky-devouring secret art, Yi Guchen's cultivation soared to the divine dwelling stage. Although at this moment, he had not formed a divine dwelling in his dantian. But in terms of the density of his qi and cultivation alone, he was comparable to a divine dwelling expert. How is this possible? What kind of secret art can make Dugu Wubai's strength break through to the divine dwelling stage? Many people were stunned. Shengguan Jingshan, Ouyang Fengyan, Yin Zhu and the others trembled. They did not expect Yi Guchen to have such a trump card. If he had used it just now, Shengguan Jingshan and the others might not have been suppressed, but at least they wouldn't have had any advantage. So he was holding back when he was fighting me. Shengguan Jingshan gritted his teeth, feeling a sense of humiliation and frustration in his heart. In Yi Guchen's eyes, Shengguan Jingshan was not qualified enough for him to go all out. Only an opponent like Hua Wuxiu deserved to go all out. Yi Guchen's aura erupted like a volcano. A power that he had never felt before flowed through his body. Is this the power of the divine dwelling stage? Yi Guchen muttered. He finally understood why Heaven and Earth Bridge Heaven Prides were no match for divine dwelling Heaven Prides. The difference in the quality and density of his Zhenqi was simply too great. If Yi Guchen hadn't relied on his perfect physical body, the limit of his sea of qi, and other means, he wouldn't have been able to fight against an expert of the divine dwelling stage. But now, after using the sky-devouring secret technique, the gap between Yi Guchen and Hua Wuxiu had shrunk a lot. Hua Wuxiu, let's fight again. Yi Guchen took a step forward, and his figure flashed directly in front of Hua Wuxiu as if he had teleported. The same sword swept out, but the power was more than twice as strong as before. So you still have such a trump card. Hua Wuxiu's expression also turned a little serious. He thought that Yi Guchen had already used all his trump cards in the battle with Shengguan Jingshan and the others. Who would have thought that Yi Guchen was still holding back? But Hua Wuxiu was a top heaven pride after all, and he wouldn't be so easily swayed. He drew his sword again and fought with Yi Guchen. In this collision, Yi Guchen's disadvantage was obviously much less. Although there was still a gap of 3 small realms between him and Hua Wuxiu, with the help of his perfect physical body, the limit of his sea of qi, and other means, he wasn't much weaker than Hua Wuxiu. Hateful. On the Hua family's side, Hua Yintao's eyes were gloomy. He thought that Hua Wuxiu would be able to achieve a decisive victory, but who would have thought there would be such an unforeseen event? On the Sacred Cliff College's side, many disciples breathed a sigh of relief. But at the moment, Hua Wuxiu still had a slight advantage. In everyone's view, Yi Guchen's situation wasn't optimistic. Dugu Wubai, you've really hidden your strength well, but it's time to end it, Hua Wuxiu said indifferently. He didn't want to drag it out with Yi Guchen for too long, and he wanted to achieve a crushing victory. Only in this way could Hua Wuxiu shatter the halo of a saint. Bright sword technique unhindered. Hua Wuxiu stabbed out with his sword, and as the sword qi gushed out, it seemed to turn into an illusory chessboard in the void. Hua Wuxiu has finally begun to show his true strength. Seeing this scene, many warriors couldn't help but exclaim. Hua Wuxiu's Go Dao was as famous as his sword Dao. He had the sacred body of light and darkness, and Go was also a black and white game, so the two were compatible. Therefore, Hua Wuxiu liked to play Go since he was young, and he even integrated Go Dao into Sword Dao. This bright sword technique was the perfect fusion of Go Dao and Sword Dao. In an instant, Yi Guchen felt that the surrounding void seemed to be sealed by the unhindered sword qi. The sky is divided into yin and yang, and Go is divided into black and white. Unhindered and unhindered, only I am unparalleled. As Hua Wuxiu's sword vibrated, black and white chess pieces appeared in the void and slashed at Yi Guchen. Interesting. Not only was there no fear in Yi Guchen's eyes, but there was also excitement. Such a strange sword technique was indeed rare. Star-breaking sword of absolute destruction. Yi Guchen pointed his sword and collided with the sword qi of the chess pieces. However, the chess pieces in the surrounding void moved continuously, draining Yi Guchen's spiritual qi. Dugu Wubai, you don't have to waste your energy. My bright sword technique has integrated Go Dao, and is not just a sword technique. Hua Wuxiu's lips curled into a faint smile. He was extremely confident in his Go Dao. Is that so? Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. It wasn't that he didn't know how to play Go. In his previous life, when he was the sword demon, he sat cross-legged on a lonely peak for more than 10 years. Other than talking to the divine condor, he often played Go with himself. Although Yi Guqin didn't specialize in Go Dao, it didn't mean that he didn't know how to play. Thinking of this, Yi Guqin's chaotic sea of consciousness turned, and his mind was shaken. In an instant his eyes shone. Dragon sword come? Yi Guqin's soul power spread out and summoned the dragon sword in the void. The dragon sword roared and swooped down. The true dragon formed by thousands of ancient swords broke through the Go Dao in the void. Bright sword technique, Tianyuan. Hua Wuxia snorted coldly and changed his sword momentum. He pointed his sword and fixed Tianyuan. Tianyuan was the center of the Go Dao, and a sword could decide the whole game. This sword was aimed directly at Yi Guqin. Sword of absolute destruction. Yi Guqin raised his sword, and a blazing sword light soared into the sky and collided with Hua Wuxia's sword of Tianyuan. The void exploded, and endless waves of sword chi swept through the surrounding space. Bright sword technique, dragon slaying. Hua Wuxia activated his vigorous spiritual chi, and a 100-meter-long black and white sword chi appeared in the void, and a fierce sword chi pressure spread out. In the Go Dao there was a saying about dragon slaying. At this moment, Hua Wuxia integrated this move into his sword Dao. The 100-meter-long black and white sword light swept toward Yi Guqin's dragon sword. Can you kill this dragon of mine? Yi Guqin shouted coldly, and his spiritual chi also erupted. He performed the sword of absolute destruction, and the sword of absolute destruction. Third ultimate holy sword. Annihilation of heaven and earth. Yi Guqin's sword cut through the air, and it was as if heaven and earth were turned upside down, and the universe was destroyed. The two ultimate moves collided, and the waves shook the world. Chapter 10:16. Heaven and Earth Annihilation was the strongest move of the three ultimate holy swords, second only to the combination of the three moves. Hua Wuxia's dragon-slaying sword was also the strongest move of the bright sword technique. Between the two, strong moves collided like meteors colliding and dragons colliding. Endless ripples of sword chi burst out, causing the surrounding space to tremble endlessly. After the collision, both of them were shaken back. Yi Guqin's chest tightened, and blood flowed from the corner of his mouth again. Hua Wuxia was ranked third on the sword ranking, and his strength was indeed not weak. Even with Yi Guqin's physical body, he was still injured in the collision. On the other side, Hua Wuxia seemed to be uninjured, but the web between his thumb and index finger where he held the sword was split open, and blood dripped down. However, compared to Yi Guqin, he was still slightly better. Looking at the situation, the Hua family and other pseudo-saint families smiled. Obviously, they thought that it was only a matter of time before Yi Guqin's defeat. Dugu Wubai, you are just a chess piece on my chessboard. Hua Wuxia looked calm. He took a step forward, and light flashed around him. His whole body seemed to have transformed into endless light shadows, and he flashed toward Yi Guqin. It's Hua Wuxia's royal-level body movement, light and shadow follower. Many warriors widened their eyes. Royal-level body movement was extremely rare, even rarer than swordsmanship martial arts. Hua Wuxia used light and shadow follower, and his body was extremely fast, like a beam of light. Not only that, but countless illusions also appeared around his body. Every shadow was no different from Hua Wuxia, and even their auras were exactly the same. Obviously, they had a strong confusing effect. Bright sword technique yin and yang. Hua Wuxia used bright sword technique again while using his body movement. In the face of Hua Wuxia's aggressive attack, Yi Guqin's chaotic sea of consciousness operated in his mind. His powerful spiritual perception spread out, trying to distinguish between the real body and the phantom. But to Yi Guqin's surprise, each of Hua Wuxia's phantoms looked no different from the real thing. If it could be seen through so easily, then it would be a shame for its emperor-class movement technique. Hua Wuxia smiled faintly. Then, the sound of swords clashing could be heard. Yi Guqin continued to wield his sword to block Hua Wuxia's attacks. It's over. Dugu Wubai is at a complete disadvantage now. Some of the loose cultivators revealed dejected looks. At this moment, Yi Guqin used wave-like subtle steps. His figure was like a willow in the wind, or like duckweed floating in the water. At the same time, a surge of sword concept erupted from within his body. Gravity sword domain go! Yi Guqin used the sword domain of the edgeless sword principle. In the void, the primordial sacred mountain appeared, and a heavy pressure spread out to the surrounding void. Even Hua Wuxia was affected, and his movement technique slowed down. 10,000 waves of the void. Yi Guqin used the ultimate move of the Great Void Sword Wave again. The sword wave could ignore most defenses. Hua Wuxia was caught off guard, and his figure was knocked back. The surrounding phantoms disappeared in an instant. The sudden reversal of the battle situation was also unexpected to everyone. Even Hua Yuntao's expression changed slightly. Sword principle domain? Hua Wuxia murmured. His eyes seemed to be emitting endless light. Vigorous sword qi surged out of his body, and immediately turned into a radiant domain. Hua Wuxia stood in the middle, like a golden divine king, releasing endless light. This was Komio Kendo's sword domain, the radiant sword domain. He finally used the sword principle domain. Hua Wuxia has the light and darkness sacred body. The radiant sword domain he released is even stronger than Hua Xingjia's. Some of the Hua family disciples clenched their fists and said, Hua Xingjia also had the Komio Kendo, and he had used it before. But now, the radiant sword domain that Hua Wuxia released was several times stronger than Hua Xingjia's. Half the sky seemed to be illuminated by the golden light. I am the light. Hua Wuxia raised his sword. In the radiant sword domain, light swords condensed one after another. In the end, there were thousands of light swords surrounding him. Suppress. As Hua Wuxia finished speaking, the light swords rushed toward Yi Guqin. Godly sword lightning manipulation art, divine annihilation heavenly punishment. In the face of Hua Wuxia's powerful move, Yi Guqin would not underestimate it. He directly used the godly sword lightning manipulation art's ultimate move. The sword pointed to the sky, and endless thunder roared, turning into a thunder tide that spread down. Rumble. The destructive thunder tide collided with the endless light swords, and a violent roar burst forth. Radiant sword domain 10,000 swords salvation. Hua Wuxia used his powerful move again. He raised his hand, and the radiant sword domain condensed into 10,000 golden light swords again, and continued to rush toward Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin's eyes were suddenly swallowed by the color of blood, and turned into the eyes of Azura. Endless bloody and murderous aura surged out of Yi Guqin's body. He seemed to have turned into a demon in the sword, killing the sky with his blood. Azura blood C18 layers suppress. Yi Guqin and Hua Wuxia confronted each other head-on, unwilling to retreat at all. Sword qi turned into a blood tide, and the 18 layers of blood prison were like bloody meteors, smashing into Hua Wuxia's radiant sword domain. Rumble. The two sword Dao domains collided, and the rain in the sky seemed to be scattered. Hua Wuxia's Komio Kendo was ordinary, but it was not weaker than the exceptional sword Dao. With the support of the sacred light and darkness constitution, Hua Wuxia's light and darkness sword Dao were even stronger than ordinary exceptional sword Dao. However, Yi Guqin's Azura sword Dao was also an exceptional sword Dao, and it was an existence that focused on killing. Its lethality was needless to say. Puffed. In such a violent collision, both of them spat out blood, especially Hua Wuxia, who had been incomparably calm before, but now there was blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. Wuxia, Hua Yuntao and the other members of the Hua family all looked solemn. It was rare for them to see Hua Wuxia injured, let alone bleeding. In their view, the number of the younger generation of the Sword Dynasty, who were qualified to injure Hua Wuxia, could be counted on one hand. Hua Wuxia raised his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. Looking at the bloodstains on his palm, Hua Wuxia's expression slowly sank. What he needed was to defeat Yi Guqin in front of everyone in the 5 Academies tournament. Not to be caught in a difficult battle like this. Yi Guqin, you have angered me. Hua Wuxia's eyes were cold. He had always been calm, but now he was really infuriated by Yi Guqin. Hua Wuxia, whatever means you have, just use them. Yi Guqin was also injured, and there was a little blood on his chin. Well, then I'll let you see the real power of the divine light and darkness body, a 7th class genius talent. Hua Wuxia's tone was cold. On the surface of his body, streaks of golden runes spread out, carrying with them endless golden runes. Hua Wuxiu's long hair was scattered, and every strand seemed to have turned golden. Hua Wuxiu's whole person seemed to have incarnated into the god of light, and his aura was extremely strong. Divine light and darkness body, light form. Hua Wuxiu lashed out with his sword again. The reddish-gold sword radiance seemed to cut through the void as it rushed towards Yi Guqin. What a strong power! Yi Guqin's expression suddenly froze. He blocked in front of him with the 9-dragon thunder prison, and with a loud bang, Yi Guqin's figure was fiercely knocked back. Chapter 10:17. Yi Guqin had previously estimated Hua Wuxiu's strength, but now, Hua Wuxiu's strength was far beyond Yi Guqin's expectations, so he was forced to retreat. When they saw Hua Wuxiu, with his golden hair fluttering in the wind and his body branded with golden runes, everyone was shocked. The gazes of all 500,000 martial artists were fixed on him. There was an indescribable shock on their faces. Is this Hua Wuxiu's divine ability? The divine body of light and darkness? This is the first time I've seen it. The divine ability of a 7th-grade genius is indeed powerful. Many martial artists stared at Hua Wuxiu without blinking. Talent was innate, and ordinary people could only envy it. I heard that Hua Wuxiu's divine body of light and darkness allows him to switch between the light form and the dark form, each with different emphasis. Some martial artists whispered to each other. I heard that Hua Wuxiu's divine body of light is supreme in terms of strength. He is unparalleled in terms of strength. Dugu Wubai is really in danger now. Many people sighed. Now that Hua Wuxiu had even used his divine ability, the scales of victory were undoubtedly tilted to his side. Ha! Killing a chicken with a sledgehammer. Hua Yuntao sneered and shook his head. Obviously, he thought that using the divine body of light and darkness to defeat Yi Guqin was a waste of talent. I knew it. How could Dugu Wubai be a match for Brother Hua? On the other side, Yushuang Yan, who had been seriously injured by Yi Guqin, looked at the golden figure in the sky with great admiration. As for Sacred Cliff College, the atmosphere was very gloomy. Hua Wuxiu's innate mystique brought about an immense amount of pressure. At this moment, even Elder Bei Xian and the others couldn't help but feel nervous. Facing Hua Wuxiu, who had taken on the form of light, Yi Guqin frowned slightly. He was also a 7th-rank prodigy and also had a special ability. He was not weaker than Hua Wuxiu. However, the Xiantian sword embryo was still a little too conspicuous. If he were to bring it out now, it would inevitably attract the attention of some people. Therefore, Yi Guqin did not intend to use his innate sword embryo. However, even if Yi Guqin couldn't use his innate sword embryo, he still had a way to deal with it. Dugu Wubai, it's over. Hua Wuxiu's eyes seemed to have turned golden as well. He held the sword of light in his hand and swept it towards Yi Guqin like a divine king. Yi Guqin also wielded his sword and went up to fight with Hua Wuxiu. With a loud clang, Yi Guqin's figure was knocked back again. Hua Wuxiu's current power was unstoppable. He was really like a primordial king. Is this the divine light and darkness constitution? It's really amazing. Yi Guqin thought to himself. The divine light and darkness constitution could allow Hua Wuxiu to switch between light and darkness. The light form was the supreme form of power. Then what was the darkness form? However, facing Hua Wuxiu's powerful attack, Yi Guqin could not stand still. Ancient God technique. Yi Guqin shouted coldly in his mind. 2 star imprints appeared between his eyebrows. Ancient God light patterns appeared under Yi Guqin's skin. His entire body grew to 9 feet tall, and his physical strength instantly increased by 8 times. Yi Guqin also transformed into his ancient God form. Hua Wuxiu again. Yi Guqin's current aura was just as strong. He held his sword and clashed with Hua Wuxiu again. Immediately, Hua Wuxiu felt a strong force coming from the tip of the sword. At this moment, Yi Guqin's skyrocketing power even overpowered his light form. How is this possible? Hua Wuxiu's expression finally changed. Not only him, but all the cultivators present were also dumbfounded. They did not expect that Yi Guqin still had a trump card that could compete with Hua Wuxiu's light form. On the Hua family's side, The atmosphere was even more deathly silent. Hua Yuntao's face was twitching. Every time he thought that Hua Wuxiu could win, Yi Guqin would use another trump card. Duguwubai, how much more are you hiding? Even Hua Wuxiu could no longer keep calm. He thought that he had seen through Yi Guqin, but he realized that Yi Guqin could always surprise him. Radiance Sword Realm, Holy Light Sword. The light sword in Hua Wuxiu's hand rose into the air. Endless divine light gathered around it, and a golden giant sword that was 100 feet long appeared. Hua Wuxiu used his light form to activate the Radiance Sword Realm and Holy Light Sword. One could imagine the power of the superposition. The entire void seemed to be filled with divine light. The sword energy was like a tidal wave. Duguwubai, can you take this sword? Hua Wuxiu raised one hand and grabbed at the void. The Holy Light Sword was grabbed by Hua Wuxiu and swept towards Yi Guqin. The sky shook as the sword swept out. The thick layers of clouds were shattered. This was Hua Wuxiu's strongest move. Its power made all the heaven prides tremble in fear. They knew that they could not take Hua Wuxiu's move. Even Kenpo and the other sword sons of the unaffiliated cultivator camp were shocked by the power of this sword. Hua Wuxiu definitely has the strength to compete for the Jiankui. Kenpo's eyes were solemn. Hundreds of thousands of gazes gathered on the scene. Would Yi Guqin be able to withstand this sword? Yi Guqin's expression was calm in the face of Hua Wuxiu's ultimate move. The 100,000 feet qi in his body was activated to the limit. True qi comparable to the divine dwelling stage gushed out and poured into the 9-dragon thunder prison. Starbreaker Sword. Yi Guqin's sword vibrated, and sword qi flowed like a river of stars. How can this move block Hua Wuxiu's killing move? Seeing Yi Guqin's action, many warriors shook their heads. But it was not over. Yi Guqin's sword power changed again, and a crescent-shaped sword light emerged again. Two swords combined? He has used this move before, and its power should not be comparable to Hua Wuxiu's. A sovereign muttered to himself. But this was not the end. Yi Guqin's expression hardened, and sword qi gushed out again. A blazing sword light appeared once again. The Qianyang Sword of Extinction was displayed. Could it be? Just as Yi Guqin unleashed all three moves, Han Lingxian's delicate body shook from the Divine Cliff Academy's side. Her eyes were filled with extreme disbelief as she looked at Yi Guqin. She also cultivated the 3 ultimate holy swords, so she naturally knew what move Yi Guqin was using. Could it be the 3 ultimate holy swords combined? Han Lingxian covered her red lips, and she was shocked. Combining 2 swords of the 3 ultimate holy swords was already very difficult. As for combining 3 swords, it was even more difficult. Even if Han Lingxian cultivated every day, she could only display the starry sun-flowing fire, and she could not even display the universal extermination. But Yi Guqin was going to display the 3 ultimate holy swords combined. How could Han Lingxian not be shocked? In the sky, Yi Guqin displayed the 3 ultimate holy swords at the same time, and the 3 sword lights froze in the void. Yi Guqin's expression was cold, and his breath condensed as he spoke slowly. Starbreaker Earth Moon Qianyang. 3 ultimate holy swords, 3 ultimate holy swords combined. Moon falling star sinking vast yang break. Yi Guqin pointed his sword at the sky, and the 3 sword lights combined into one, turning into an extremely sharp sword light. This was the 3 ultimate holy swords combined, the ultimate move. Chapter 10:18. As an emperor-level sword technique, the ultimate move of the 3 ultimate holy swords was undoubtedly powerful. As Yi Guqin swung his sword, the sword radiance condensed and the surroundings showed an astonishing scene of the falling moon, the dying stars, and the shattering of the sun. Such an astonishing phenomenon and fluctuation once again silenced the hundreds of thousands of warriors around the sword battle square. Their throats seemed to be blocked. The fluctuation of the move that Yi Guqin displayed at this moment was not weaker than Hua Wuxiu's sword move at all. Their sword moves collided in the void. Boom. What followed was an earth-shattering clanging sound. The fluctuation that swept out destroyed the clouds in the sky. Rumble. The billowing waves of sword qi spread out, and even a few false saints had to take action to block the sword qi fluctuation. In the center of the collision, it was as if a nuclear bomb had exploded. Dazzling flames and divine light burst out. Hundreds of thousands of eyes stared at the center without blinking. In particular, the people of Sacred Cliff College and the Hua family were nervous. Cough. In this collision, the sound of coughing blood was suddenly heard. Yi Guchen's figure was seen to be thrown back 100 feet. A deep wound appeared on his chest, and blood dripped down. Defeated, Dugu Wubai is finally defeated. Seeing Yi Guchen's appearance, many people in the audience exclaimed. In particular, the people of the Hua family were shouting excitedly. Yi Guchen's opponents Yu Shuangyan, Hua Xingjie, Ouyang Tianji and the others were also full of joy. However, before the joy on their faces could spread completely, on the other side, Hua Wuxia's figure was also revealed. He was also blasted back. There was a huge wound on his body, and blood kept flowing from the corner of his mouth. The joy on the faces of the people of the Hua family was completely frozen. Even Yu Shuangyan, who worshipped Hua Wuxia to the extreme, was extremely pale. She shook her head, and her face was full of disbelief. All the noise in the audience fell silent in an instant. They had never seen Hua Wuxia in such a sorry state. His clothes were dyed red and dripping with blood. It could be said that in the younger generation of the Sword Dynasty, there were not many people who could make Hua Wuxia in such a sorry state. Yi Guchen was one of them. This time, even Hua Yuntao's face was extremely cold. He wanted Hua Wuxia to cripple Yi Guchen, but in the end the two were evenly matched. On the other side, Jian Mr., First Elder Ime, Elder Beixian, and the others heaved a sigh of relief. Good, very good. Dugu Wubai, it seems that I have been wrong about you all this time. Hua Wuxia's voice was cold, and no emotion could be heard. He no longer underestimated Yi Guchen. But who would have thought that Hua Wuxia still greatly underestimated Yi Guchen's strength? Boom, boom, boom. The chaotic collisions were extremely intense. Hua Wuxia and Yi Guchen also had wounds on their bodies. However, what surprised everyone the most was that Yi Guchen's vital energy did not show any signs of exhaustion after such a long battle. This was naturally attributed to Yi Guchen's ultimate sea of qi. Hua Wuxia also noticed this and his expression turned serious. It was impossible for him to exhaust Yi Guchen's real qi to achieve victory. If that's the case, Hua Wuxia's expression turned cold. He no longer held back. His body shook, and waves of strange power spread out again. What trick is Hua Wuxia playing now? Yi Guchen's eyes focused. Sacred body of light and darkness, dark form. Dark air currents surged around Hua Wuxia's body. His long hair, which was dyed golden, turned pitch black in an instant. His eyes, which were overflowing with divine light, also became as dark and deep as a black hole. The divine light around him dissipated, and turned into a violent pitch-black air current. Hua Wuxia's sacred body of light and darkness switched from the light form to the dark form. It's the dark form. It's rumored that Hua Wuxia's dark form is extremely fast and strange. It's very different from the light form. Some people exclaimed. The moment Hua Wuxia switched to the dark form, his speed suddenly increased by several times. His body almost turned into a pitch-black shadow as he rapidly attacked Yi Guchen with his sword. That speed made Yi Guchen's heart tremble slightly. Chapter 1019. Hua Wuxia's dark form was extremely fast. This kind of extreme speed was not just in terms of speed. In terms of sword speed, it was also extremely fast. Dark Night 18 slashes. At this moment, Hua Wuxia's voice was deep and cold. His entire body seemed to have turned into a shadow that blended into the void. The two swords moved quickly and slashed out 18 times. Even Yi Guchen was caught off guard, and could only block with the 9-Dragon Thunder Prison. Puchi sword wounds appeared on Yi Guchen's body. Although Yi Guchen had blocked most of Hua Wuxia's sword moves, the extreme speed of the attacks still caused many wounds to appear on Yi Guchen's body. So close, yet so far. Yi Guchen once again used so close, yet so far, yet so far. However, he still could not catch up with Hua Wuxia's speed. As expected of a grade 7 Heaven's Pride talent. Yi Guchen sighed in his heart. None of the innate divine abilities were simple. Hua Wuxia naturally had his reasons for being able to rank third on the sword list. The power of the light form was supreme. The extreme speed of the dark form was supreme. This made Hua Wuxiu almost invincible. There should be a result soon, right? Some warriors muttered as they looked at Yi Guqin, who was being suppressed. Yi Guqin's speed was actually not slow. However, compared to Hua Wuxiu's dark form, he was still slightly slower. Gravity Sword Realm. Yi Guqin once again used the sword realm of the edgeless sword principle. In the void, the shadow of the immemorial sacred mountain appeared. A strong gravitational force pressed down on Yi Guqin from all directions. Hua Wuxiu's figure was naturally affected and slowed down a little. Humph! At this moment, Hua Wuxiu snorted coldly. Sword chi fluctuations erupted from his body again. Endless dark sword light spread out from his body. Dark Sword Dao, Eternal Night Sword Domain. Around Hua Wuxiu, a dark sword way domain spread out. It was the sword domain of the Dark Sword Way, the Eternal Night Sword Domain. The power of this sword domain directly counteracted the pressure of the Gravity Sword Domain. Not only that, but it also included Yi Guqin. In an instant, everything around Yi Guqin disappeared. All that was left was dead silence and darkness, as if he was in the depths of the cold and dark universe. To the onlookers, Yi Guqin's figure was submerged in a pitch-black sword domain. Oh no! Beixian Elder and the others raised their eyebrows and looked anxious. Hua Wuxiu's Eternal Night Sword Domain was very strange. If one was sucked into it, it would be like a fish that had fallen into a net, and it would be very difficult to escape. Not only that, within the Eternal Night Sword Domain, all senses, vision, hearing, touch, and so on would be suppressed to the limit. However, Hua Wuxiu, who was in his dark form, was not affected at all. In fact, he could even be strengthened. Ah, little bastard, this is the result of going against the Hua family. Hua Yuntao sneered in his heart. In his opinion, since Yi Guqin had fallen into the Eternal Night Sword Domain, he was a piece of meat that Hua Wuxiu could do whatever he wanted to him. Wasn't it easy to destroy Yi Guqin? Senior brother Dugu is in danger. Zemo's face was also filled with anxiety. Suki Miyazaki shook her head slightly. Although most people did not think that Yi Guqin could succeed, there were still some people who still had a glimmer of hope. Now this glimmer of hope was about to be extinguished. Within the Eternal Night Sword Domain, Yi Guqin waited with rapt attention. He realized that his 5 senses had been suppressed to the extreme. Whoosh! At this moment, a sword gleam suddenly pierced toward Yi Guqin's chest. Yi Guqin blocked with his sword. Soon, another pitch-black sword gleam appeared. Then, streaks of pitch-black sword gleams burst out from the depths of the darkness. Yi Guqin blocked with his sword, adding a few more wounds to his body. Ha! Dugu Wubai, after falling into the Eternal Night Sword Domain, you are a fish on the chopping block. Perhaps it will be easier for you if you surrender. In the darkness, Hua Wuxiu's voice sounded. In this world, the one who can make me Dugu Wubai surrender has yet to be born. Yi Guqin's eyes were completely swallowed by the color of blood. He used the Eye of Azura. The Eye of Azura could slow down the opponent's movements and observe them. Is that so? Then I have no choice but to cripple you. It's a pity that I finally met an opponent, but you are standing on the opposite side of the Hua family. In the darkness, Hua Wuxiu's sigh sounded. 1,000 shadow swords. In the dark void, Hua Wuxiu's voice was cold. The space rustled. Then countless pitch-black sword auras rushed toward Yi Guqin from all directions. That momentum was as if they wanted to pierce Yi Guqin into a sieve, although killing was not allowed in the 5 Academies tournament. However, this move was enough to seriously injure Yi Guqin and completely cripple him. In the face of such an extreme move, Yi Guqin's mentality was extremely calm. He raised one hand, and a 5-colored divine light burst out from Yi Guqin's body. It was 5-sword array, and there were many 5-colored array patterns spreading in the surrounding void. This was a move that Yi Guqin had not used for a long time. The 5 Emperor's Cosmos Sword Formation. The 5 Emperor's Cosmos Sword Formation was an Earth-level formation. Even now, its power was definitely not weak. In the past, Yi Guqin could not fully exert the power of the 5 Emperor's Cosmos Sword Formation. But now Yi Guqin, who had relied on the sky-devouring secret technique to increase his strength to the divine dwelling stage, was able to activate the true power of the Earth-level low-grade sword formation. At the same time that Yi Guqin brought out the formation, Emperor Jin, Emperor Qing, Emperor Black, Emperor Scarlet, and Emperor Yellow transformed into the 5 formation spirits of the Azure Dragon, White Tiger, Vermilion Bird, Black Tortoise, and Tongue Snake. This is an Earth-level formation. In the darkness, Hua Wuxiu's voice sounded surprised again. The sword auras that burst out from the depths of the darkness were all blocked by the 5 formation spirits. Yi Guqin stood in the middle of the formation, motionless. Hua Wuxiu, what other tricks do you have? Show them all. Yi Guqin smiled faintly. At this moment, a shadow suddenly emerged from behind Yi Guqin. It was Hua Wuxiu in his dark form, holding a sword and stabbing at Yi Guqin's back. I was waiting for you to appear. Yi Guqin's lips curved in a cold smile. Although his 5 senses were suppressed, Yi Guqin's knowledge C was a special chaotic knowledge C. Although the Eternal Night Sword domain could suppress soul perception, it could only suppress the perception of ordinary knowledge C. Yi Guqin's knowledge C was a special chaotic knowledge C, so his soul perception was not weakened by much. Dugu 9 Swords Breaking Sword Style. Yi Guqin raised the 9 Dragon Thunder Prison, and terrifying sword aura gushed out as if it could pierce through everything. Not good. Hua Wuxiu's expression turned serious. He did not expect that Yi Guqin's soul perception would not be suppressed by the Eternal Night Sword domain. But now it was too late to retreat. Dark Emperor's Sword. Hua Wuxiu swept his sword, and a shadow of the Dark Emperor appeared behind him, and a pitch-black sword radiance burst out. Breaking sword style, breaking all techniques. Yi Guqin was not afraid, and clashed with Hua Wuxiu's sword. There was a loud bang. As if heaven and earth were being split open, an array of light appeared. The breaking sword style was breaking all techniques. At this moment, when it defeated Hua Wuxiu, it also broke the shackles of the Eternal Night Sword domain. At the same time, everyone outside saw that the pitch-black knowledge C seemed to be collapsing. Is it finally over? Looks like Wuxiu has already crippled that beast. Hua Yuntao's face was filled with joy. Chapter 10:20. At this moment, everyone in the sword battle square was staring at the dark domain. Cracks appeared one after another, showing signs of collapsing. However, the Hua family members did not look worried at all. Instead, they looked happy. In their opinion, Hua Wuxiu must have defeated Dugu Wubai and ended the battle. The reason why they were so confident was because the Hua family members knew how powerful Hua Wuxiu's Eternal Night Sword domain was. It could be said that in the Eternal Night Sword domain, Hua Wuxiu in his dark form was the Grim Reaper. Any enemy who was pulled into the Eternal Night Sword domain would be greatly suppressed. Hua Wuxiu in his dark form would be strengthened. Under this situation, there was no doubt that Hua Wuxiu would win. Haha. Confusi, it seems that our Tensei College will be the champion again in this 5 Academies competition. Hua Yuntao said to Confusi with a smile on his face. The real result has not appeared yet. Don't be happy too early. Confusi stroked his beard with a cold expression. However, one could also see a trace of worry in his eyes. Obviously, although Confusi looked calm on the surface, he was still worried about Yi Guqin in his heart. After all, Hua Wuxiu's dark form and the Eternal Night Sword domain brought too much pressure. Dugu Wubai, Ling Mayin and the other girls bit their lips. They were also worried about Yi Guqin. On the other side, Yu Shuangyan, Ouyang Tianji, Hua Xingjia and the others had an incomparably happy smile on their faces. It was as if they could not wait to see Yi Guqin's embarrassing defeat. Rumble. Under the gazes of everyone, more and more cracks appeared on the pitch-black Eternal Night Sword domain. Finally, in the midst of an explosion, it collapsed. At the same time as it disintegrated, a figure was also sent flying while vomiting blood. As expected, everyone in the Hua family, including Yi Guqin's enemies, was pleasantly surprised. As for the disciples of Sacred Cliff College, their faces were pale. Did senior brother Dugu lose in the end? Many disciples clenched their fists unwillingly. At this moment, a cultivator's face suddenly froze as he said with extreme surprise and disbelief, "Huh, that's not right. That figure doesn't seem to be Dugu Wubai." Following his words, The clamor in the crowd instantly turned deathly silent. Hua Yuntao's old face suddenly froze, and he looked over. The figure that was sent flying while vomiting blood was none other than Hua Wuxiu. On the other side, the Eternal Night Sword domain collapsed, and Yi Guqin's figure appeared. Although there were wounds of various sizes on his body, looking at the situation, he didn't suffer any fatal injuries, nor was he crippled. On the contrary, Hua Wuxiu vomited blood, and a huge bloody hole appeared at his waist, almost penetrating his body. This wound was caused by the broken sword style. The crowd was dead silent, and countless people's eyes were about to pop out. Who would have thought that such a scene would occur in the end? Yi Guqin, who was trapped in the Eternal Night Sword domain, didn't suffer much damage. On the contrary, Hua Wuxiu, who used the Eternal Night Sword domain, was severely injured. This caused everyone to feel incredulous. Hua Yuntao, on the other hand, looked as if he had eaten a dead fly, and his face was extremely ugly. Haha, Hua Yuntao, this old man said before. Don't be happy too early. Confuzi stroked his beard and laughed heartily, extremely carefree. This time, Yi Guqin could be said to have won enough face for Sacred Cliff College. Hearing Confuzi's words, the corners of Hua Yuntao's eyes twitched, and he was so angry that his hands and feet trembled slightly. All the Hua family members were also shocked and confused. They couldn't understand at all why Hua Wuxiu would lose. As for Yu Shuangyan, Hua Xingjia, Ouyang Tianji and the others, each and every one of them looked like dead people. And they were all dumbfounded like wood, unable to say anything. Ling Maoyin, Han Lingxian, and the other girls' beautiful eyes were filled with tears, and they were happy for Yi Guqin. Dugu Bai, how much have you hidden? Hua Wuxiu's face was no longer as calm as before. His waist and ribs were bleeding nonstop. And his face was also pale because of the loss of blood. He also didn't understand why Yi Guqin's spiritual perception wasn't suppressed by the Eternal Night Sword domain. Moreover, the earth-grade formation that Yi Guqin had used was also something that had never been used before. Hua Wuxiu thought that he had seen through Yi Guqin, but in the end he was still too shallow. Do you think that I will tell you? Yi Guqin's expression was indifferent. Even until now, Yi Guqin still had many trump cards that he hadn't used. Some of them were related to Yi Guqin's original identity, so it wasn't appropriate to use them. Hearing Yi Guqin's words, Hua Wuxiu's eyes darkened. Do I really have to use my trump card? Hua Wuxiu's eyes showed a hint of struggle. He indeed had trump cards that he hadn't used yet. However, that trump card was prepared for the Sword Sun battle. If he used them now, he would be in a disadvantageous position in the Sword Master battle. What made Hua Wuxiu more hesitant was that even if he used those trump cards, he wouldn't be able to kill Yi Guqin. At most, he would be disabled. Hua Wuxiu really wanted to kill Yi Guqin now. I can't kill anyone in the 5 academies competition, and now I can't kill Dugu Wubai, even if I use my trump cards. If it's the Sword Master battle, I won't have such concerns. Hua Wuxiu thought in his heart and finally made a decision. Looking at Hua Wuxiu's gradually restrained momentum, everyone in the square was stunned. Was Hua Wuxiu going to stop and admit defeat? The faces of the Hua family were as white as ashes. The strongest genius of the Hua family had to bow down to Yi Guqin. If this news spread out, the prestige of the Hua family would definitely plummet. However, seeing Hua Wuxiu's actions, Yi Guqin frowned instead. If Hua Wuxiu used all his strength, he wouldn't be afraid at all. If Hua Wuxiu still had some tricks up his sleeve, there would be a change in the outcome of the Sword Sun battle. Dugu Wubai, you're really capable. You've really opened my eyes. Hua Wuxiu took a deep breath and his expression became calm again. Hua Wuxiu, you're really not an ordinary person. You can tolerate what others can't. Yi Guqin looked at Hua Wuxiu deeply. Hua Wuxiu's forbearance made Yi Guqin think highly of him. He was indeed a somewhat tricky enemy. Then, Hua Wuxiu said with an inexplicable smile on his face, Dugu Wubai, don't be happy too early. The 3 days haven't passed yet. Those geniuses won't allow you to win the 5 academies competition. The moment Hua Wuxiu's voice fell, the other geniuses in the square immediately looked at Yi Guqin with sharp eyes. Especially the geniuses of the aristocratic families. If Yi Guqin really won the 5 academies competition this time, It would definitely have an extremely unfavorable impact on the aristocratic families. Hua Wuxiu. Yi Guqin's eyes turned cold. Hua Wuxiu's understatement once again aroused the hostility of the geniuses of the aristocratic families towards Yi Guqin. At this moment, Yinju, Ouyang Fengyun, and the other geniuses looked at each other and rushed towards Yi Guqin. Not only that, Shangguan Jingshan also brandished his sword and attacked. Jiang Fengmian's body remained motionless, but a sound transmission secretly reached his ears. The sound transmission came from a senior figure of the Jiang family. Jiang Fengmian shook his head and sighed. Alas, there's nothing I can do. As soon as he finished speaking, Jiang Fengmian's hand shook. The maple leaf that he was playing with instantly transformed into a maple leaf sword that was as red as fire. Jiang Fengmian, the fifth on the sword list, finally attacked. Chapter 10:21. No one expected that Hua Wuxiu's words would cause such a big reaction. Ouyang Fengyun, Yinju, and Shangguan Jingshan all had conflicts with Yi Guqin before. Unexpectedly, Jiang Fengmian, who ranked 5th on the sword list, also made a move. Jiang Fengmian had never made a move before. Even Mu Xingzu's impression of Jiang Fengmian had changed slightly. But now, seeing that Jiang Fengmian also made a move, Mu Xingzu immediately became angry. She stomped her feet and shouted, "Jiang Fengmian, you hypocrite! I thought you were a little different from Shangguan Jingshan, but it turns out that you are jackals of the same tribe." Hearing Mu Xingzu's reprimand, Jiang Fengmian smiled helplessly. In fact, he was unwilling to besiege Yi Guqin. However, the senior members of the Jiang family had sent a voice transmission to Jiang Fengmian to make a move. They could not let Yi Guqin become the champion of the 5 academies competition, so he had no choice but to make a move. Now the 4 geniuses made a move together, causing an uproar. Jiang Fengmian, ranked 5th on the sword list. Yinju, ranked 6th on the sword list. Shangguan Jingshan, ranked 7th on the sword list. Ouyang Fengyun, ranked 9th on the sword list. The 4 geniuses of the sword list made a move at the same time. Not to mention Yi Guqin, who had consumed a lot of energy at the moment. Even if Hua Wuxiu had been at his peak, he would still have been completely suppressed. Not to mention that in addition to the 4 geniuses of the sword list, there were also many geniuses of the aristocratic families who had decided to give it their all. As for Hua Wuxiu, he frowned slightly. He was proud of his status and did not want to make a move together at this moment. He did want to kill Yi Guqin, but he had to defeat Yi Guqin completely alone. If he did not defeat Yi Guqin completely, there would be a crack in Hua Wuxiu's character. At this moment, the whole place was silent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the sword battle square without blinking. The 4 geniuses of the sword list led by dozens of geniuses of the aristocratic families and academies. This force was enough to crush any genius. Even Jian Jinghong probably would not be able to gain any advantage. This is troublesome. Bei Xian Elder and the others were so nervous that their breathing seemed to stop. This should be the last hurdle of the 5 academies competition. If Yi could pass this stage successfully, it would be a miracle. Would be famous, his name would be known in the entire dynasty. It would even affect the judgment of the suzerain of the 360 ridges. After all, many of the lords of the 360 ridges had been roped into the aristocratic family's camp. But some was a neutral group of the aristocratic families. The competition between the 5 academies was undoubtedly a prediction of the battle for the position of the sword master. If Yi Guqin could succeed, it would naturally make those neutral lords lean towards the rogue cultivator camp. However, with the current situation, even the people from the Divine Cliff Academy felt nervous. These were 4 geniuses of the top 10 of the sword list, plus dozens of other geniuses. Not to mention that Yi Guqin had gone through a series of battles, and was covered in wounds. Even if the ultimate sea of qi could allow Yi Guqin to have an endless supply of true qi, he would eventually be exhausted. Sigh, what a pity. If Dugu Wubai had signed up for the competition, he might have really become the champion of the 5 academies competition. Yes, Dugu Wubai's strength is indeed worthy of his arrogance, but the current situation is really not good. Some of the rogue cultivators shook their heads and sighed. At this point, no one would doubt Yi Guqin's strength. He's going to lose in the end. Hua Yuntao's expression softened. Although Hua Wuxiao had lost to Yi Guqin, Hua Yuntao knew that Hua Wuxiao's real trump card had not been revealed yet. But in the end, at least Yi Guqin would not be the champion. This made Hua Yuntao's expression slightly better, just as the entire Sword Sovereign City was watching. Within the battle arena plaza, the final battle had finally begun. Sword of Death, Broken Nether. Inju swept out with his sword momentum strong. As the 6th on the sword list, his strength was unquestionable. Shangguan Jingshan held the Balrog Sharktooth sword and slashed out, the sword radiance spreading out like a torrent of flames. Burning Flame Sword Principle, Bursting Flame Break. Dragon Swimming Sword Technique, Dragon Roaring in the Sky. Although Ouyang Fengyun had been injured in the battle with Yi Guqin, he still had the strength to fight. Now he attacked again. The last one was Jiang Fengmian. He had not attacked before, so his strength was the most complete. At this moment, the other 3 people attacked. Jiang Fengmian sighed in his heart, but he had no choice but to attack. Gusu Sword Technique, Moon Setting, Crow Crying, Frost Filling the Sky. Jiang Fengmian's blue hair fluttered in the wind. With the maple leaf sword in his hand, his sword posture was free and unrestrained. His sword was like the moon setting and the crow crying, beautiful and fierce. As the 4 sword principal prodigies attacked, the rest of the geniuses from the aristocratic families also attacked together. All kinds of swordsmanship moves were displayed, which turned into a gorgeous and terrifying torrent of moves, surging toward Yi Guqin. The vigorous torrent of moves poured toward Yi Guqin. No sword principal prodigy could withstand such an attack. However, Yi Guqin's expression was extremely calm. He sneered and said, "How can I, Duga Wubai, be treated so well by all the sword principal prodigies? In that case, I will do my best to return the favor." 5 Emperors Cosmos Sword Formation Attack. Around Yi Guqin, the 5 swords of the array suddenly burst out. There was no doubt about the power of an Earth-level formation. In addition, Yi Guqin activated his ultimate move again. He used the God-slaying sword technique with his left hand, and the immortal slaying sword technique with his right hand. Immortal Gods Weep. Yi Guqin held his 2 swords across the sky and once again displayed a powerful move. Immortal Gods Weep. Rumble. It was as if hundreds of thousands of thunderbolts had exploded at the same time. The terrifying waves almost raised the entire arena to the ground. The ground was full of ravines, and it was a mess. If it were not for the fact that the pseudo-saints had created a true chi shield to cover the entire arena, the remaining waves would have even affected many of the surrounding spectators. At this moment, the arena was full of dust. Amidst the dust, Yi Guqin's figure retreated continuously, and he kept coughing up blood. There were also many bloody wounds on his body. No matter how powerful Yi Guqin was, he was still human. Facing so many sword principal prodigies, he would still be injured. "Master," Mu Xingzu said with tears in her eyes. Her tone was heart-wrenching, and she wanted to rush into the arena directly. However, she was stopped by Ying Lang and the others. "Xingzhu, you can't interfere. Otherwise, Dugu Wubai's efforts will all be in vain," Ying Lang shouted. Yi Guqin could only face the 1 man against 1,000 men mode alone. If anyone interfered, it would be judged as Yi Guqin's failure. That was also the reason why 1 man against 1,000 men was called hellish difficulty. Everyone felt a chill in their hearts when they saw Yi Guqin's miserable state. However, the situation on the other side stunned everyone. More than a dozen sword principal prodigies had collapsed to the ground, their bodies twitching, and it was unknown whether they were dead or alive. The remaining dozens of sword principal prodigies were also pale and coughing up blood. As for Jiang Fengmian and the other 3 sword principal prodigies who were in the top 10, their mouths were also stained with blood. Yi Guqin had fought against a group of sword principal prodigies by himself, and he had actually injured them. At this moment, the world was dead silent. Many sword principal prodigies looked at Yi Guqin, who was all alone, and they were all shocked. If Yi Guqin could really succeed today, then he would become a true legend among the younger generation of the Sword Dynasty. Chapter 1022. At that moment, Yi Guqin was holding his sword with both hands, and his clothes were stained with blood. Even his black hair had turned a deep dark red, because it was dyed with blood. Blood continued to drip from his chin. However, Yi Guchen did not seem to notice. A pair of pitch-black bottomless eyes, with a deep and profound look. Nothing could make the sword demon afraid. Nothing could make the sword sect afraid. Even if he was blocked by countless people, Yi Guchen wanted to turn the tables with his own strength. Again, Yi Guchen roared coldly. Like a demon in the sword, his sword aura rampaged and wreaked havoc in all directions. Not only did his aura not fall, but it also skyrocketed again, as if he wanted to compete with the heavens. Damn it, let's continue. Inju and the others did not look too good. The fact that they had besieged the sword roll prodigy was already considered to have lost all face. However, they still could not defeat Yi Guchen with such a siege. The longer this dragged on, the more disadvantageous it would be for Inju and the others. They no longer held back. Their auras rose to the peak as they fought with Yi Guchen. Shangguan Jingshan's giant sword swept across with great force. Inju was very agile. He was like a deadly assassin, attacking from tricky angles from time to time. Ouyang Fengyan also attacked with all his might. Although Jiang Fengyan was a little helpless, he had to obey the orders of the Jiang family's higher-ups. He could only attack. Gusu sword technique, Jiang Feng's fisherman's fire versus choking sleep. Jiang Fengyan attacked again. The maple leaf sword aura swept out as if it had turned into maple leaves. Each maple leaf carried a sharp sword aura. Yi Guchen blocked with his sword. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes. Although Jiang Fengyan's sword aura looked strong, it did not bring much pressure. He could not help but look at Jiang Fengyan in surprise. Jiang Fengyan's expression didn't change, but there was a dim light in the depths of his eyes. Yi Guchen instantly understood. Jiang Fengyan didn't really want to make a move on him. He was afraid that it was because of the Jiang family behind him. Thinking up to this point, Yi Guchen did not say anything. Everyone is well aware of this. Although Jiang Fengyan had held back a little, the power of his moves could not be considered weak. Because if they were too weak, anyone would be able to tell that Jiang Fengyan was holding back. Therefore, Jiang Fengyan had actually used 70% of his strength. Not to mention the fact that the other three geniuses on the sword roll were attacking with all their might. The rest of the geniuses made their moves too. Time trickled by. The previous series of battles had already taken more than 2 days. There were only a few hours left until the third day. At this moment, Yi Guchen's body was covered with wounds. If not for his perfect physical body and the recovery ability of the ancient god body, he would have collapsed long ago. However, in such a continuous high-intensity battle, even if Yi Guchen's energy reserve could withstand it, his mind was somewhat exhausted. After all, Yi Guchen was a human, not a god. However, the geniuses besieging Yi Guchen were all panting and exhausted. He can still hold on. The entire sword battle square, and even the entire sword monarch city, was silent at this moment. Yi Guchen's performance had really exceeded their expectations. At this point, even some of the warriors from the aristocratic family's camp could not help but admire Yi Guchen. Are you still going to hide your strength at this point? If we can't even deal with Dogawubai, what face do we have left? Inju said with an ugly expression. Shanghai Jingshan and Ouyang Fengyan also frowned. Yi Guchen was like an unkillable cockroach. Although Yi Guchen could not kill them, they could not defeat Yi Guchen either. Whether it was in terms of true energy endurance or physical strength, Yi Guchen was stronger than almost all of the geniuses present. This was also the reason why Yi Guchen dared to activate the strength of 1,000 men mode. The problem now was that the duration of the strength of 1,000 men was only 3 days. Yi Guchen could afford to drag it out, but they could not. Inju is right. If we can't defeat Yi Guchen together, we will definitely become the laughingstock of the entire sword dynasty. Let's not hold back anymore. Ouyang Fengyan said. That's right. Shanghai Jingshan nodded slightly. After everyone reached an agreement, they also used their last resort. Scorching Flame Sword Technique, Scorching Flame 9 Heavens. Shanghai Jingshan's true energy surged like flames. He swung his sword 9 times in succession, each of which transformed into a shocking wave of flames. Ouyang Fengyan also pushed his strength to the limit and unleashed an extremely powerful sword strike. Clouds follow the dragon, wind follows the tiger. Heavenly sword cry of dragon and tiger. Death god single strike. Inju condensed all of his sword chi, and a terrifying dark sword light pulsed from the tip of his sword. He swung his sword horizontally, and it was as if the death god was about to take a life. Finally, Jiang Fengmian also made his move. Autumn Maple Sword Dance. Jiang Fengmian swung his sword, and his sword chi transformed into maple leaves that drifted through the air. Amidst the solemnity, there was a sword intent that could wither all things. Not only the four sovereigns, but the rest of the sovereigns who were besieging Yi Guqian also exerted all their strength to display their trump cards. Everyone simultaneously displayed their most powerful skills, and a torrent of sword chi that was even more terrifying than before swept out, let alone those of the divine dwelling stage. Even some of the heavenly palace stage sovereigns were a little shocked. Time seemed to slow down at this moment. Everyone's eyes were filled with different emotions as they stared at Yi Guqian. This move could be said to be a fatal move. If Yi Guqian couldn't withstand it, he wouldn't just lose the championship. It was even possible that his cultivation would be crippled. At this moment, even Confuzi was highly focused. If anything happened to Yi Guqian, he would immediately take action to save Yi Guqian. After all, a natural saint was far more important than the title of champion. In the face of the torrent of moves that were almost unstoppable, even Yi Guqian felt a faint pressure, and his breathing became somewhat labored. But there was no fear or alarm in his deep eyes. Endless golden light surged on the surface of Yi Guqian's body, and the ancient god power spread. Finally, a golden armor condensed on the surface of Yi Guqian's body. The armor's surface was covered with many ancient and primordial totem patterns, and it looked boundless and heavy. It was the ancient god clan's ultimate defensive skill, the ancient god immovable king armor. Not only that, Yi Guqian pointed a finger between his eyebrows, and a terrifying spirit wave swept out like an endless wave. Duga's 9 swords heart sword style. In the sky, the dragon's sword floating in the clouds, as if it had been summoned, whizzed down with endless sword chi. The dragon sword was formed by Yi Guqian's heart sword style and the all-creation sword intent. It was extremely powerful, but it was only a one-time use. Even so, it was enough to deal with the current situation. Yi Guqian did not reveal the all-creation sword intent, as it would be his trump card in the battle for the Sword Sun title. But Duga's 9 swords, heart sword style, was unleashed without reservation. The terrifying spiritual energy fluctuation caused some of the sovereigns to be extremely stunned. This Dugu Wubai not only has a strong physical body, but he also has such high attainments in spirit power. I see. Is this the reason why your spirit perception is not suppressed by the eternal night sword domain? Hua Wuxia revealed a look of realization. Now, Yi Guqian's heart sword style activated the dragon sword, and it exploded with extreme power. Yi Guqian pointed his sword at the crowd, and along with the roar of the dragon sword, a voice whizzed out. Who can understand the wind in the sword? Sword Demon Wubai Dugu. One move to make you all bow down. Chapter 1023. One move to make all of you bow down. Yi Guqian's words were like the words of a god, carrying a heroic spirit that could swallow thousands of miles. How many geniuses in the Sword Dynasty would dare to speak to the geniuses of the sword ranking in such a manner? At this moment, even the rogue cultivators who sided with the aristocratic families could not help but feel a trace of admiration for Yi Guqian. Although they were in different camps, the heroism and pride of a sword cultivator was admirable. At this moment, the entire sword battle square, and even the sword sovereign city were silent. Everyone's breathing almost stopped as they quietly waited for the final result. The deans and elders of the 5 academies also waved their hands, forming a solid true energy shield that covered the entire sword battle square, to prevent the aftermath of the collision from spreading. On one side were the ultimate moves of the 4 geniuses of the sword ranking and dozens of geniuses of the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth. On the other side were Yi Guqian's unique 9 Dugu swords, and the sword dragon condensed in the sword tomb. The two finally collided fiercely in front of everyone's eyes. The world seemed to have lost its sound at this moment, and all sound stopped. It was as if everything had returned to silence. This deathly silence continued for a few breaths of time. Then, there was a terrifying roar that shook the heavens and the earth. Boom! Like the explosion of a nuclear bomb or the shattering of the sun. Endless ripples of sword chi poured out like a broken dam, fiercely hitting the true energy shield. The genuine chi shield condensed by a false saint expert actually shook violently under such a collision. In the endless waves of dust, there were many screams and cries of blood. The geniuses of the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth who were besieging were thrown out like scattered fireworks. Blood was spat out like it was free. Then one by one, the geniuses fell to the ground and fell unconscious. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. At the same time, Shangguan Jingxin, Jiang Fingmian, and the other geniuses of the sword ranking were all sent flying, spitting out blood, and their bodies were covered with sword wounds. After all, the dragon sword was formed from thousands of ancient swords from the sword mound. It contained countless sharp sword chi, and it was not something they could block. He looked at the 4 injured geniuses on the sword roll, who were vomiting blood. The entire place fell into a dead silence at this moment. The sound of people swallowing their saliva could be heard. No one had expected that the geniuses who were besieging them would end up in such a miserable state. What was even more unexpected was that 4 prodigies in the top 10 of the sword roll would actually end up in such a sorry state even after joining forces. However, the most important thing right now wasn't the sky prides. It was Yi Guchen. As everyone expected, Yi Guchen's situation would not be any better, as he had withstood the unique attacks of so many geniuses by himself. Yi Guchen was heavily injured and had fainted on the ground. This meant that the strength of 1,000 men challenge had undoubtedly ended in failure. In the end, Wuxia would be the champion. Thus, at that moment, everyone's gazes landed on the other side. The dust that filled the sky slowly dissipated. The entire sword battle square was almost in pieces. Everyone from Sacred Cliff College held their breaths, and were so nervous that they were sweating profusely. What was the outcome of this year's 5 academies competition? What was Yi Guchen's state? Under the gazes of hundreds of thousands of martial artists, the dust dissipated. Yi Guchen's figure was finally revealed. He held his sword in front of him with both hands. That mystical pattern divine weapon was already full of cracks, and was almost broken. Even a supreme-grade mystical pattern divine weapon could not withstand such an attack. For the first time, the immovable king armor on his body was also full of broken patterns, and was on the verge of collapsing. However, Yi Guchen's figure was still standing firmly. His blood-stained face and determined expression were still as unmoving as a boulder. At that moment, Yi Guchen was like a peerless divine sword that stood between heaven and earth, exuding an unprecedented pride and sharpness. Yi Guchen did not fall. The expressions of the many Sacred Cliff College disciples were first dazed, then tears welled up in their eyes. After that, they started to shout and roar with incomparable fanaticism. The person in front of them was the sword demon Dugu Wubai. He was the disciple of Sacred Cliff College's holy emblem, the eternal pride. Endless exclamations and shouts seemed to be about to break through the sky of the entire sword sovereign city. Yi Guchen withstood the attacks of so many prodigies by himself, and was still determined to fight. He did not fall. Regardless of the final outcome, Yi Guchen's figure standing proudly at that moment was deeply imprinted in the eyes of all the surrounding martial artists. Even the lords of the 360 ridges had looks of admiration in their eyes. Some of the lords even had a long-lost passion in their eyes. What was a sword cultivator? Like Yi Guchen. He actually withstood it. Wuxia's expression froze. If it were him, he would also have to pay a heavy price for such a besieging attack. However, Yi Guchen had been through a series of battles before, and now he was still able to withstand such an attack. This was indeed greatly beyond Wuxia's expectations. The prodigies of the aristocratic families, including Hua Xingjie, Yu Shuangyan, and the others, were all like corpses. Their eyes were numb, and their bodies were stiff. Tianxian College disciples were like this. Wu Hongyan's beautiful eyes lit up. Yi Guchen's performance surprised her, but at the same time, she also admired him. As for Suki Miyazaki, for the first time, an extremely complicated expression appeared on her face. Because of Mu Xingzu, Suki Miyazaki had always disapproved of Yi Guqin. She even thought that Yi Guqin was far inferior to Jian Jinghong. But now, Yi Guqin's performance fiercely shocks Suki Miyazaki. In the entire Sword Dynasty, how many people could perform like this? Even Jian Jinghong, who had once defeated Suki Miyazaki, was not as good as this. Compared to Suki Miyazaki's mixed feelings, Mu Xingzu, Han Lingxian, and Ling Moyin's eyes were filled with tears of joy. This was the indomitable Yi Guqin in their hearts. In the shattered sword battle square, Yi Guqin held his sword with both hands, like the king of swords, and coldly looked at Shangguan Jingshan and the others. Shangguan Jingshan, Yingju, and the others' expressions were extremely ugly. They did not expect that even with their combined efforts, they would not be able to defeat Yi Guqin. What made them even more embarrassed was that in their hearts, they were actually afraid of Yi Guqin. One had to know that they were all prodigies on the sword ranking. In the Sword Dynasty, almost no one of their generation could make them afraid. But now Yi Guqin had done it. Not only did he make them afraid, but he also made them feel a trace of fear. Do you want to continue? Yi Guqin's tone was indifferent. That one sentence made Shangguan Jingshan and the others subconsciously take a step back. As for the few prodigies on the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth who were still conscious, their eyes were filled with fear. They looked at Yi Guqin as if they were looking at the king of hell. Yi Guqin's words made the prodigies not dare to act rashly. Such a situation caused everyone to be astounded once more. This was the true strength of one man against 1,000. Who in the world can be a match for one man? Two swords in the sky, aspiring to the pinnacle of swordsmanship in the dynasty. If anyone is not convinced, there's no harm in fighting again. Chapter 1024. Yi Guqin's voice was as cold as the reprimand of a deity. However, no one in the field dared to act rashly. At this moment, the referee also shouted, 3 days have passed. Sacred Cliff College's Dugu Wubai has successfully challenged the strength of 1,000-men mode. The champion of the 5 Academies tournament is Dugu Wubai, a disciple of the holy emblem of Sacred Cliff College. In the end, the referee's words completely finalized the result. The champion of the 5 Academies tournament belonged to Sacred Cliff College and Yi Guqin. Wow! An earth-shattering clamor resounded once again. All the disciples of Sacred Cliff College burst into cheers. Even the various elders and the 5 hall masters had joyous expressions on their faces. Yi Guqin had turned the situation around and secured the victory of the 5 Academies tournament by himself. This was also the loudest sound that Sacred Cliff College had made after a long period of silence. Compared to the excitement of Sacred Cliff College, many disciples of Tensei College, Sun Moon College, and Long River College were ashen-faced. And those from the aristocratic families were also upset, as if they had eaten a fly. This 5 Academies tournament was far-reaching and significant because it was close to the Sword Sun battle. If Hua Wuxiu had won the championship, the reputation of the aristocratic families would have reached an unprecedented peak. But now it was ruined by Yi Guqin alone. Damn it! Even with Hua Yuntao's pseudo-saint state of mind, he was so angry that his old face twitched, and his withered hands clenched tightly. If not for the presence of Qin Fuzi, Wu Hongyan and the others, he would have slapped Yi Guqin to death. TSK, what an unexpected result. In the sky, several sword sons from the aristocratic families shook their heads. They didn't want to see Yi Guqin win because it would affect the prestige of the aristocratic families. However, this Dugu Wubai winning the championship is not what that person is willing to see. Sword 2's tone seemed to have a deeper meaning. At the mention of that person, the sword sons of the aristocratic families fell silent. The faces under the masks were filled with a trace of reverence. In the entire Sword Dynasty, there was only one person who could make these sword sons reveal such expressions. He was the rumored leader of the 13 swordsmen, Jian Kuei, who was also the current Jian Kuei. The sword leader's prestige in the Sword Dynasty exceeded that of Hua Wuxiu, Jian Jinghong, and other prodigies on the sword ranking. On the other side, the sword sons of the rogue cultivators were in a good mood. I already said that Brother Dugu is a person who can create miracles. He has the qualifications to become a sword son, or even Jian Kuei. Kenpo said with a bright smile. Other than Yi Tianqing, Qin Fuzi, and Leng Qianhen, he was also one of the few people who knew Yi Guqin's true identity. Naturally, he had confidence in Yi Guqin. You said that Dugu Wubai can become a sword son, but it's not certain if he can become Jian Kuei. Even little 13 won't have an easy time dealing with that Jian Kuei. Jian Qi said. She was the only female sword son in the rogue cultivator's camp. She had some feelings for Jian Shisan in her heart. Naturally, her heart was on Jian Shisan's side. Yi Guqin's performance was amazing. But in Jian Qi's heart, Jian Shisan was the most likely candidate to compete for the position of Jian Kuei. Hearing this, Jian Shisan, who was wearing a ghost mask, said in a hoarse voice, Jian Kuei is very strong, and Dugu Wubai is not weak either. I'm not sure I can win against them. No matter what, Dugu Wubai is still a heavenly son of the rogue cultivator's camp. The stronger he is, the more help he will be to us. Jianwu said. The entire sword battle square, and even the Sword Emperor city, were in a state of excitement. Sacred Cliff College hadn't won the 5 Academies tournament for a long time. Not to mention, Yi Guqin didn't win the tournament through ordinary means, but through the method of 1 man against 1,000. This was even more shocking. One could imagine that this 5 Academies tournament would have a far-reaching impact on the entire Sword dynasty. It would even affect the faction of the rogue cultivators and the aristocratic families. At least in terms of reputation, the rogue cultivators' camp had recovered 10%. At this moment, all the rogue cultivators' people were cheering, while the aristocratic family's warriors were all dejected. Shangguan Jingshan Inju and the others' faces alternated between green and white. They were very embarrassed. They couldn't defeat Yi Guqin even if they joined forces. In the future, their reputation in the Sword dynasty would undoubtedly fall to the bottom. Dugu Wubai, don't be too proud. Hua Wuxiu's tone was indifferent. Although Yi Guqin's strength was beyond Hua Wuxiu's expectations. But Hua Wuxiu was also confident in his own trump card. He believed that as long as he used his trump card, even Yi Guqin would find it difficult to resist. When the time came, Hua Wuxiu would personally avenge today's humiliation in the battle for the Sword Master title. Hearing Hua Wuxiu's words, Yi Guqin smiled faintly and said, Then I'll wait and see your performance in the battle for the Sword Master title. Yi Guqin knew that Hua Wuxiu must be holding back. But Hua Wuxiu didn't know that Yi Guqin also had more than one trump card. Ultimate Sword Domain, All Creation Sword Intent, Lightning Sword Principle. Yi Guqin didn't show these 3 trump cards. And in the battle for the Sword Master title, Yi Guqin was confident that with these 3 trump cards, he would give the aristocratic family's elites a big surprise. Just as the audience was in an uproar, in the distant sky, a golden flying boat suddenly crossed the void and came over. A figure was standing on top of the flying boat. The figure was tall and slender, and he wore an ancient mottled bronze mask on his face. He looked like a god-fiend. His dark golden hair fluttered in the void, and he had an awe-inspiring aura. His right hand was behind his back, and his left hand was holding a bronze pagoda. The most noticeable thing was that he only had 4 fingers on his left hand, and he was missing a little finger. With the arrival of this figure, the entire bustling arena suddenly quietened down. The various sword sons in the sky were even more shocked. The sword sons of the independent cultivators' camp were extremely solemn. The sword sons of the aristocratic family's camp were slightly surprised. They didn't expect this person to appear. Seeing the sudden change in the atmosphere, Yi Guqin's gaze also fell on that figure. It's Jian Kuei. A warrior's eyes widened as he shouted. Jian Kuei, the head of the 13 sword sons of the Sword dynasty. If it was any other dynasty, he would be the crown prince. Yi Guqin also raised his eyebrows slightly. He didn't expect to finally meet the legendary Jian Kuei after so long. Jian Kuei stood in the sky with a bronze mask on his face and a bronze pagoda in his hand. His dark golden hair fluttered in the wind, and he looked like a god-fiend with an awe-inspiring aura. Feeling Jian Kuei's aura, Yi Guqin frowned. Jian Kuei's hidden aura was even more oppressive than Hua Wuxiu's. In addition, Yi Guqin also vaguely felt that there was something strange about Jian Kuei. At this moment, Su Qingyu's voice sounded in Yi Guqin's mind. Yi Guqin, you have to be careful. This person's soul fluctuations are very strange. I'm afraid he's not that simple. Hearing Su Qingyu's warning, Yi Guqin was also surprised. He didn't expect that even Su Qingyu would say that there was something strange about Jian Kuei. The atmosphere in the arena became a little gloomy because of Jian Kuei's arrival. At this moment, Jian Kuei's gaze fell on Yi Guqin. He said indifferently, "Dugu Wu Bai, is it? You did well. You have two choices now. 1. Become my follower. 2. Lose to me in the battle for the Sword Sun position." Chapter 10:25. Jian Kuei's words were like the decree of a god, spreading throughout the entire sword battle square, and even the Sword Imperial City. For a time, all the noise disappeared. Everyone's face was frozen with extreme horror. They didn't expect that the sword chief would open with such overbearing words the moment he arrived. What kind of existence was Yi Guqin now in the Sword Dynasty? As a disciple of the holy emblem of Sacred Cliff College, he passed through the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing in one fell swoop, and was titled as a natural saint. In the Sword Tomb, he broke the record of Jian Jinghong and stepped into the 10,000 feet ground. In the 5 Academies tournament, he defeated a group of geniuses in the 1 against 1,000 mode and successfully won the championship. It could be said that now, Yi Guqin was almost a godlike existence among the younger generation of the Sword Dynasty. Even Hua Wuxia, who was 3rd on the sword ranking, was not qualified to say such words. But Jian Kuei opened his mouth like this, acting as if it was a matter of course. How domineering such an attitude was. Hearing Jian Kuei's words, all the disciples of Sacred Cliff College flushed, and their eyes were almost spitting fire. Yi Guqin could now be said to be the benchmark and leader of Sacred Cliff College, and even the entire rogue cultivator camp. Jian Kuei actually said that he wanted Yi Guqin to become his follower, or he would kill him in the battle for the Sword Sun title. If it were other geniuses, even Hua Wuxia, they would not dare to say that they would kill Yi Guqin, or even suppress him. However, the sword chieftain just had to say that. After a brief moment of silence, a clamor broke out. Everyone was amazed by Jian Kuei's overbearing attitude. Yi Guqin had just become the champion of the 5 Academies tournament, and Jian Kuei spoke like this, undoubtedly to suppress Yi Guqin's victory halo. Even Mu Xingzu was furious. Her master was someone who had once fought with Di Haotian. What qualifications did Jian Kuei have to make Yi Guqin his follower? Many people from Sacred Cliff College were cursing in their hearts, but they didn't dare to show it. After all, Jian Kuei's identity was there. No matter how disgusted and disdainful people were, they could not casually insult the crown prince. The sword chief is still as arrogant as ever. On the Sword Sun's side, the corners of Saber Nine's lips curled into a smirk. This Jian Kuei was the enemy of all the Sword Suns in the rogue cultivator camp. Only those with capital can be arrogant. Little 13, what do you think? Jian Wu turned to Jian Shisan. Sword 13's tone was indifferent as he said, "His strength has become stronger again." "No matter what, Jian Shisan, we all believe that you can defeat Jian Kuei," Jian Shi said. He had great confidence in Jian Shisan. Jian Shisan was indifferent. His eyes under the grimace mask were dark and deep. TSK, Big Brother is still as domineering as ever. I wonder if Dugu Wubai will submit to Big Brother? Sword 3 was interested. Dugu Wubai won't submit so easily, Sword 2 said thoughtfully. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Yi Guqin at this moment. Jian Kuei was able to become the leader of the 13 Sword Sons because of his strength. He was even more dangerous than Hua Wuxia. Many people stared at Yi Guqin. They wanted to see how Yi Guqin would choose. Would he choose to submit to Jian Kuei and become his follower? Or would he fight to the death with Jian Kuei in the battle for the position of Sword Sun? Yi Guqin smiled coldly and looked at Jian Kuei. Although he didn't know what was so strange about Jian Kuei at the moment, that didn't stop him from making a choice. You want me to be your follower? Are you worthy? Let's not talk about you, Jian Kuei. Even in this vast world, there is no one who can make me, Dugu Wubai, follow. In the past, in the present, and in the future, there will be none. I, Dugu Wubai, will only walk my own path. If anyone wants to block my path, sorry. Yi Guqin slowly raised the 9-dragon thunder prison sword in his hand. The sword tip pointed straight at Jiankui. Life and death questioning sword edge. As soon as Yi Guqin finished speaking, a storm seemed to have set off between heaven and earth. A suffocating pressure swept out in all directions. Everyone was stunned. They had guessed that with Yi Guqin's pride, he wouldn't agree so easily. However, they had never expected that not only did Yi Guqin not agree to it, but he also opposed it with equal harshness. Hearing Yi Guqin's words, Jiankui's expression didn't change. For a moment, the atmosphere was silent. An oppressive pressure caused many of the sky prides present to feel their chests tighten, making it difficult for them to breathe. After a long while, Jiankui shook his head and sighed. Unfortunately, since ancient times, heroes have short lives. If you live, you'll be a natural saint. If you don't, you'll be a pile of bones. Jiankui's words had a hidden meaning. Everyone understood what he meant. He said that Yi Guqin wouldn't survive the battle for the position of Sword Son. In the past, there were no restrictions on the methods used. Naturally, there were no restrictions on life and death. This was also the rule of the Sword Dynasty. The 5 Academies tournament was actually just an exchange of pointers. But the Sword Son represented the future high-level powerhouse of the Sword Dynasty. Only through the experience of blood and fire could one grow. Therefore, the battle for the position of Sword Son was also a battle of life and death. Those who were afraid of death would not participate. My life isn't that easy to lose. Jiankui doesn't have to worry about this. Yi Guqin's expression was indifferent and his tone was calm. This performance made many people look at him in a new light. After all, Jiankui was almost the ceiling of the Sword Dynasty's younger generation. There were only a few people who could compete with him. Okay, then I'll see how tough your life is. Jiankui's tone was deep and cold. He also saw that Yi Guqin had extraordinary potential and wanted to take him as a follower. Logically speaking, if it was an ordinary person, it would be something that they couldn't even ask for. It would be a supreme honor. Unfortunately, he had misjudged him. This Duguwubai is really a troublemaker. Inju Oyangfengyan and the others coldly said. First he provoked Wuxia. Now he provoked Jiankui. They couldn't help but worry about Yi Guqin's safety in the battle for the position of Sword Son. Will young Master Dugu be okay? Han Lingxian asked worriedly. Don't worry. After all, the Sword Son of the Rogue Cultivator camp, as well as Jian Jinghong and the others, will not let Brother Dugu face those opponents alone. Xuanlian said. In short, the conflict between Yi Guqin and Jiankui. From another perspective, it was also a conflict between the aristocratic families and the Rogue Cultivator camp. In this battle for the position of Sword Son, Jiankui must not be allowed to win first place again. Otherwise, the 5 pseudo-saint aristocratic families would definitely use this as an excuse to seize the right to speak in the Sword Dao Alliance. This was also what Kenpo had asked Yi Guqin to do before. The entire Sword Emperor city also became noisy because of the conflict between Yi Guqin and Jiankui. At this moment, pseudo-saint experts from the 5 academies walked out. Confuzi Wuhongyan, Hua Yuntao Shanghai Bo, and Yin Lingshan also stepped into the sky. Seeing the 5 pseudo-saint experts step out, the crowd fell silent again. They all stared at the 5 pseudo-saint experts in surprise. Hadn't the 5 academies competition already ended? What was the meaning of all this? Just when everyone was puzzled, Confuzi stepped out, cleared his throat and said, Everyone, in addition to the 5 academies competition, there is another important thing to announce in the Sword Emperor city. This is a major event related to the entire Sword Dynasty, which is the battle for the position of Sword Son. As soon as Confuzi finished speaking, the crowd was once again in an uproar. Was the battle for the position of Sword Son going to start now? The Sword Sons in the sky all had strange expressions on their faces. However, they seemed to have already received some news. As for Hua Wuxia and the other geniuses on the sword ranking, they all had strange looks in their eyes. This time, the battle for the position of Sword Son will be different from the past. It will be held in the Myriad Demon's Nest. As soon as his words fell, it stirred up a huge uproar. Chapter 1026. What? Did I hear wrong? The nest of demons? Is it that nest of demons? Nonsense, if it's not the nest of myriad demons, who else could it be? What's going on? Is the nest of demons a place for humans? I'm afraid they'll be torn to pieces before they even get in. Hearing Confuzi's words, most of the martial artists were shocked. Yi Guchen had already returned to the crowd of Sacred Cliff College. He frowned and asked, "Nest of demons? Where is that?" The nest of demons is a famous place of danger. It's a place where many monsters live and gather. It's rumored that there's a monster king at the peak of the 7th rank there. Ling Moyin replied in a serious tone. A monster king at the peak of the 7th rank. Yi Guchen was also shocked. A monster king at the peak of the 7th rank was as intelligent as a human, and its strength was comparable to a human false saint. If it could take that step and become a monster king at the 8th rank, it would be comparable to a human heaven's tribulation sage. Of course, monsters were stronger than humans at the same level. However, it was more difficult for them to break through than humans. Therefore, a monster king at the 8th rank was rarer than a human heaven's tribulation sage. Although the nest of demons was a place where countless monsters gathered, no one had ever seen a monster king at the 8th rank. However, there were a few monster kings at the 7th rank. This was also the reason why many of the cultivators present were surprised. In a place like the nest of demons, not to mention a group of prodigies, even a false saint would not be able to get away with it if he entered alone. If he was discovered by a monster king or besieged by a stampede of monsters, he would be at risk of losing his life. Compared to the other prodigies, Yi Guchen was very calm. He knew that the Sword Dynasty would not be stupid enough to let their prodigies die in the nest of demons. There must be a deeper meaning behind it. However, the nest of demons reminded Yi Guchen of the divine Condor and Blackie, who he had been separated from for a long time. Previously, when Su Qingyu used up all his soul power to tear open space and take them away from the infinite wilderness plain, the divine Condor and Little Hay had been separated from Yi Guchen. There was still no news about them. The ancient god's jade archive in Yi Guchen's origin ring did not detect any trace of Blackie's aura. Obviously, the divine Condor and Blackie weren't in the Sword Dynasty. The nest of myriad demons was a place where demonic beasts gathered. Perhaps he could find some clues about the divine Condor and Blackie there. As for their safety, Yi Guchen wasn't too worried about it. The divine Condor was a cunning spirit. He would never put himself in danger. As for Little Black, there was no need to even mention it. As one of the 100 races in the universe, the chaotic world demonic ape clan possessed an indestructible demonic body, and their vitality and recovery abilities were shockingly strong. Unless there was a heavenly tribulation saint or a rank 8 demon royal, no one would be able to hurt Blackie. If they were really in the myriad demon's nest, not only would they not be in any danger, they might even be able to live a comfortable life. Of course, this was only Yi Guchen's guess. After all, spatial cracks could lead to anywhere. There was no fixed number. After that, Yi Guchen continued to observe Confuzi. He knew that there must be more to the story. As for why the Sword Sun battle is held in the myriad demon's nest, it is because there is a treasure left by the ancient sacred dynasty there, Confuzi continued. His words once again caused a huge uproar. As expected, Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. He had obtained a quarter of the incomplete map in the ancient Chaos Wilderness. The other 3 were taken by the War God Dynasty, the Mayuo Dynasty, and the Tyrannical Saber Dynasty. Later, there was also news that the 4 dynasties were in contact with the ancient Sacred Dynasty, hoping that the treasure left by the ancient Sacred Dynasty would appear. Yi Guchen had learned in the Great Tomb that the ancient Sacred Dynasty was the Ancient Ruins Sacred Dynasty. In other words, the location of the Ancient Ruins Sacred Dynasty's treasure was in the myriad demon's nest. Hearing Master Jian's words, a glint flashed in the eyes of Sword Chief, who was standing in the sky, under the bronze mask. This time, the Sword Dynasty and the other 3 dynasties will join forces to explore the myriad demon's nest. Those demonic beast kings and high-ranked demonic beasts will be delayed by the experts of the 4 great dynasties. The remaining treasures of the sacred dynasty will be explored by the geniuses. And this time, the outcome of the battle for the position of Sword Sun will also be determined based on the value of the treasures obtained. The one who obtains the most opportunities will be the Jiankui. After Confuzi finished speaking, the whole place fell into a dead silence. The Sword-Sun battle this time was different from the previous ones. In the past, the Sword-Sun battle was held within the Sword Dynasty, and the competitors were only the geniuses of the Sword Dynasty. But this time, they would be going to the extremely dangerous Myriad Demon's Nest. Even if the Monster Kings and high-level monster beasts were stopped by the experts, the remaining monster beasts were also very dangerous. Not to mention, there was also the terrifying beast horde. Other than that, the geniuses of the Sword Dynasty would fight among themselves for the Sword-Sun battle. As for the Sword-Sun battle, Mo Luo, Ba Dao, and the other 3 dynasties, they would also send the geniuses of the God of War list, Blood list, and Saber list into the Sacred Dynasty to obtain opportunities. The battle for the position of Sword Master this time was far more dangerous than any of the previous ones. The dangers of the monster beasts, the dangers of the geniuses of the other dynasties, the dangers of the Sacred Dynasty's treasure, and the dangers of the internal battles. With all these dangers stacked together, the difficulty level of the Sword-Sun battle could be described as hellish. Many geniuses turned pale at that moment. Even some of the geniuses of the Sword list swallowed their saliva. Such a hellish difficulty level of the Sword-Sun battle had never appeared before. One could imagine how dangerous it would be to participate in the Sword-Sun battle this time, and the chances of losing one's life would be greatly increased. Even Hua Wuxia, Yinju Shengguan Jingshan, and the others were frowning. With such a degree of difficulty, they might not even be able to make it back alive, let alone obtain the Sword-Sun battle. Fortunately, the Sword Dynasty was the leader of the 100 great dynasties after all. Although most of the geniuses were slightly pale, they did not think of quitting. Seeing this, Confuzi said calmly, "The Sword-Sun battle this time is unprecedentedly dangerous, but the rewards will definitely not be small. You can imagine the opportunities in the ancient Sacred Dynasty's treasure. Moreover, before you go to the 1,000-demon nest, the ancient sword tomb will open again, and you can all enter to cultivate. There is such a treatment." Hearing this, the genius's eyes lit up. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed as well. Yi Guchen was no stranger to the ancient sword tomb. The Sword Dynasty had 4 mystic realms: Mount Saint Crossing, Sword Tomb, Ancient Sword Tomb, and Skyless Sword Realm. The ancient sword tomb was not like the sword tomb, where anyone could enter at will. Therefore, every time it opened, it was an extremely precious opportunity. The ancient sword tomb contained many sword techniques left behind by the ancestors of the Sword Dynasty. There was also a Heaven Dao stone tablet, which could be used to comprehend, practice, and even create sword techniques. Moreover, the Heaven Dao stone tablet could release different levels of brilliance according to the power of the sword technique created. It was extremely magical. If the sword tomb was the best place to comprehend sword intent, then the ancient sword tomb was the best place to cultivate sword techniques, and even create sword techniques. Creating your own swordsmanship. Yi Guchen's lips curled into a faint smile. Yi Guchen had not created his own sword technique for a long time, ever since the Pathos of Heaven. It was not that he did not have the ability to create one, but that he was accumulating and comprehending. It was fine if he did not create one, but once he did, it would definitely be earth-shattering. Yi Guchen was also very curious. If he could enter the ancient sword tomb, would he be able to create an amazing sword technique? Chapter 1027. As Confuzi finished explaining the series of matters, the entire Sword Emperor city fell into a fierce clamor and discussion. This time's Sword-Sun battle was different from the past. It would definitely be exciting and intense. Not to mention that they would have to compete with the geniuses of the other 3 top dynasties, which brought about even more variables. There were also people who were curious about who would become the Sword-Sun, or even Jiankui. Many martial artists could not help but look at Yi Guchen. In the 5 Academies tournament, he had swept away all the geniuses and won the championship. Would he be able to withstand such a hellish test? Before it began, everything was unknown. The ancient sword tomb will open in half a month. All the geniuses of the 5 academies should go back and recuperate. Be prepared. The ancient sword tomb is your last chance to improve your strength, Confuzi warned. Yiguchen also nodded secretly. This time's Sword Sun battle was unprecedentedly difficult. Yiguchen also needed the help of the ancient sword tomb to cultivate the All Heaven's End, Ultimate Sword Domain, and other trump cards. Yiguchen also wanted to obtain some of the predecessor's supreme techniques in the ancient sword tomb. As the Sword Dynasty was a country of sword cultivators, the ancient sword tomb naturally had some sword techniques left behind by the predecessors. Of course, most importantly, Yiguchen also wanted to use the Heavenly Dao Stone Tablet's ability to practice and create his own sword technique martial arts. After that, the 5 academies also began to prepare to leave the Sword Emperor City and embark on the journey back home. The sword leader glanced at Yiguchen before he left. Then he left behind a few words. Cherish your last days. After saying that, Jiankui turned and left. These words caused the surroundings to quiet down. Jiankui's character was domineering and arrogant. In the Sword Dynasty, almost no one dared to go against him. However, Yiguchen went against Jiankui in front of hundreds of thousands of Sword Dynasty martial artists. This undoubtedly caused Jiankui to feel an icy killing intent towards Yiguchen. The threat in his words caused Confuzi and the rest to frown slightly. But he couldn't say anything. The battle for the position of Swordmaster did not forbid killing. Those who had the qualifications to become the Sword Sun would definitely stand out from the endless slaughter. I'll be waiting. Yiguchen's tone was indifferent. On the other side, Wuxia also opened his mouth and said, Duguwubai, our battle is not over yet. Perhaps we can still spar in the ancient sword tomb. Wuxia would also head to the ancient sword tomb this time. Not only did he want to comprehend the supreme arts of the predecessors, but he also wanted to learn them. Furthermore, he wanted to perfect his trump card through the Heavenly Dao Stone Tablet. It could be said that in the ancient sword tomb, Wuxia and Yiguchen would have a confrontation on a whole new level. That was a confrontation of swordsmanship talent and comprehension. Wuxia was confident that the power of his self-created trump card would definitely leave others in the dust and arouse the strongest resonance from the Heavenly Dao Stone Tablet. Wuxia would take back the glory that he lost in the 5 Academies tournament in the ancient sword tomb. Hearing Wuxia's words, the surrounding people were also curious. They more or less knew that although Wuxia had used most of his strength in this battle, he still had some tricks up his sleeve. Many people were also looking forward to the confrontation between the two. I, Duguwubai, will accept any challenge. Yiguchen said in a carefree manner. This kind of bearing made people look askance. As for Shangguan Jingshan, Yinju, and the rest, their faces were a little gloomy, and they left without saying anything. Especially Shangguan Jingshan. He was too ashamed to appear in front of Mu Xingzu again. Jiang Fengmian, on the other hand, showed a helpless smile at the corner of his mouth. Seeing this, Yiguchen nodded slightly to Jiang Fengmian. Master, don't be so polite to that guy. Mu Xingzu could not help but snort with her pretty nose. Obviously, she was still upset about Jiang Fengmian's previous attack. Only Yiguchen knew that Jiang Fengmian was still a little reserved, and was not that kind of hypocrite. Amidst the sighs of countless people, the 5 Academies tournament finally came to an end. However, the storm brought about by Yiguchen had just begun. After a period of time, it would definitely cause a big disturbance in the entire Sword Dynasty. Of course, this had nothing to do with Yiguchen. What he needed to do now was to recuperate from his injuries, and then strengthen his strength again in the ancient sword tomb, and then prepare for the battle of the Sword Master with all his strength to become the Sword Master of the Sword Dynasty, and then participate in the battlefield of the Chosen Ones. Yiguchen believed that he could participate in the battlefield of the Chosen Ones as the Sword Master, or even as the Jiankui. After that, Yiguchen and the others embarked on the journey home. Mu Xingzu and the others also followed by his side. Several sword masters from the Rogue Cultivator camp also returned to Sacred Cliff College together. This time, all the martial artists in the Rogue Cultivator camp celebrated together. The disciples of Sacred Cliff College were even more excited. They looked at Yiguchen, as if they were looking at a god. Yiguchen reversed the situation, and established the victory with his own strength. This kind of light was really dazzling. After returning to Sacred Cliff College, Yi Guqin attracted the admiration of all the disciples in the entire college. Even for someone like Ling Mayin, there was a look of admiration in her eyes that she was unaware of. It went from disgust to admiration. A woman's thoughts were so unpredictable. Of course, Xuanlian and Ling Emoshu were also regarded as heroes. After all, they were all fighting for Sacred Cliff College. In particular, Ling Emoshu, a fallen genius, rose again, and his strength was indeed impressive. Many disciples of the Divine Cliff College believed that Ling Emoshu would be able to achieve a good performance even in the Battle of the Sword Master. After returning to the college, Yi Guqin also began to recuperate from his injuries. Although the 5 Academies tournament did not involve killing, Yi Guqin had accumulated many injuries in his body after continuous battles. If it were not for the perfect body and the body of the ancient god, Yi Guqin's body would have been destroyed long ago. After recuperating for 7 or 8 days and taking many elixirs, coupled with the nourishment of the blood essence in the heart of the ancient god, Yi Guqin had mostly recovered. Master, have you recovered from your injuries? The celebratory banquet over there has been urging you. Mu Xingzu's voice came from outside the cave. She did not return to Tianxian College, but followed Yi Guqin. There's no need for that. Yi Guqin shook his head lightly. After the 5 Academies tournament, Sacred Cliff College also held banquets for several days in a row. After all, Sacred Cliff College had been silent for too long. Now that they were proud and elated, they would naturally celebrate. However, Yi Guqin preferred to be quiet and did not like the atmosphere of the banquet. Several sword masters are inviting Master. Mu Xingzu's voice came again. Yi Guqin heard this, pondered for a moment and got up. Since the sword masters invited him, he still had to go. What's more, he and Kempo were old acquaintances. Later, Mu Xingzu brought Yi Guqin to a palace in the Divine Cliff Cave. There was a hubbub of voices inside, and many disciples and elders of Sacred Cliff College were there. Kempo and several other sword masters sat in the seats of honor, their faces covered with masks. Only Jian Shisan was missing. Chapter 1028. Seeing Yi Guqin's arrival, the atmosphere in the palace became even more lively. Many Sacred Cliff College disciples looked at him with respect and admiration. Even Bei Xian Elder and the others nodded to Yi Guqin. It could be said that Yi Guqin's reputation in Sacred Cliff College had reached its peak. Yi Guqin nodded to greet them one by one. Brother Dugu, are you feeling better? Kempo asked with a smile. It's not a big deal. Yi Guqin smiled. It's really difficult to invite you here, but you're really not bad, a female voice said. Yi Guqin glanced at him, and his eyes were filled with surprise. The person who spoke was wearing a sword master mask and a tight suit that outlined her graceful curves. It was Jianxi. Among the 13 sword masters, there were not many women. Jianxi raised her wine cup and Yi Guqin also raised his cup and returned the gesture. Jianxi lifted a corner of her mask slightly, revealing her snow-white chin, and drank the wine. Dugu Wubai, I have to admit that your strength is indeed beyond my expectations. If there are no accidents, you have a great chance to win the position of swordmaster, Jianxi said. Before, when Kempo strongly praised Yi Guqin, Jianxi didn't believe it. However, after the Mount Saint Crossing and the 5 Academies competition, Jianxi finally understood Yi Guqin's true strength. Oh, does this sword master think that my master doesn't have the ability to defeat Jian Kuei? Hearing Jianxi's words, Mu Xingzu raised her eyebrows. In her mind, Yi Guqin was invincible among his peers. How could someone who could fight with Di Haoyan be inferior to Jian Kuei? Jianxi's beautiful eyes narrowed slightly under her mask. If it were an ordinary person who questioned her, she might have been impatient. However, Mu Xingzu was Wu Hongyan's favorite disciple. He was also qualified to compete for the position of Sword Son. His status and strength were not low, she said calmly. I do acknowledge Dugu Wubai's strength, but Jian Kuei is not that simple. Let me put it this way. Among the rogue cultivators, there are only 2 people who can fight Jian Kuei. Little 13 and Jian Jinghong. Little 13 naturally referred to Jian Shisan. As for Jian Jinghong, he was the vice alliance leader of the Way of the Sword, the disciple of sword sovereign Yi Tianqing. His strength was unquestionable. In Jian Shi's view, although Dugu Wubai's talent was extraordinary and his strength was not weak, he had only risen to power recently. He still did not have the ability to compete with Jian Kuei. How can my master be weaker than them? Mu Xingzu was slightly unhappy. Xingzhu, don't be rude, Yi Guchen said calmly. Although Jian Shi's words were straightforward, his guess was not without reason. She was not the only one who thought so. Many people in the outside world probably thought so too. There was a high chance of becoming the Sword Son. However, it was very difficult to defeat Jian Kuei. Dugu Wubai, you are a prodigy of the rogue cultivators after all. When the battle for the position of Sword Son begins, we will help you. Little 13 will take care of Jian Kuei. You don't have to worry too much, Jian Shi said. Ha! Yi Guchen smiled faintly and did not refute. When the time came, it was not certain who would be protecting who. Alright 11, Brother Duga's ability may be far beyond your imagination, Kenpo said to smooth things over. He was the only one among the 13 sword sons who knew Yi Guchen's true identity. He was someone who could go head-to-head with Di Haotian. Would he be afraid of Jian Kuei? Kenpo would not believe it. Yi Guchen smiled and did not mind. Jian Shi was kind enough to let him pay attention to Jian Kuei. However, Jian Shi did not know that Yi Guchen's strength had not been fully revealed in the 5 Academies tournament. Following which, they toasted each other and exchanged toasts. Yi Guchen did not resist too much. After a series of battles, it was not bad to relax. In the end, the banquet was over, and only Kenpo and Yi Guchen were left. Brother Yi, your performance this time was amazing. There was no one around, so Kenpo called Yi Guchen by his real name. It was okay. Hua Wuxia did not use his full strength, not to mention Jian Kuei. In Yi Guchen's heart, there was always a trace of vigilance towards Sword Leader. Even Su Qingyu once said that Jian Kuei's soul fluctuations were very chaotic and unpredictable. Jian Kuei is indeed very strong, but his identity is a mystery. He does not seem to be a genius of the 5 pseudo-saint aristocratic families, Kenpo said in a slightly dignified tone. It seems that Jian Kuei does have secrets, Yi Guchen muttered to himself. With Brother Ye's strength, you should be fine as long as you are careful. Moreover, in this battle for the Sword Son position, our camp of individual cultivators has a trump card. It will definitely surprise the Sword Sons of the aristocratic families, Kenpo said with a mysterious smile. Oh, you have a trump card? Yi Guchen raised his eyebrows slightly. It seemed that the Sword Sons of individual cultivators were not completely unprepared. Of course, you still have to be careful. It's hard to guarantee that the aristocratic families will not use any tricks, Kenpo warned. Yi Guchen nodded slightly. I'm very curious. If Brother Yi participates in the battle of geniuses as Jian Kuei and is exposed in the end, perhaps the entire Nantian region will be shocked, Kenpo said with a smile. That day will not be far away. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed and his tone was serious. He had not forgotten about Di Haotian and Gu Xiaoyang. After that, the two chatted for a while and then left. Not long after leaving the palace, Yi Guchen suddenly stopped in his tracks. On a cliff in front of him, there was a figure sitting alone on the rock wall. He was holding a wine pot in one hand, and the ghost mask on his face was half lifted, revealing his chin and drinking. On his back was a blood-red long sword. It was Jian Shisan. Under the pale and cold moon, a figure wearing a ghost mask and drinking alone under the moon. This scene looked desolate and strange. Jian Shisan, Yi Guchen muttered to himself. He did not go to the banquet like the other sword sons, but drank alone here. Yi Guchen felt that Jian Shisan had some secrets. Of course, that was Jian Shisan's own business, and had nothing to do with Yi Guchen. He had no intention of prying. As if sensing Yi Guchen's arrival, Jian Shisan put on his ghost mask again, and then threw the wine pot to Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen took the wine pot, and looked at Jian Shisan with some doubt. If you want to live, don't participate in the battle of the Sword Son, Jian Shisan said in a hoarse voice and then left in a flash. Yi Guchen was stunned and his expression was grave. What did Jian Shursen mean by warning him? Did he think that he would also be killed by Jian Kuei? Or did he have other intentions? After pondering for a while, Yi Guchen did not understand. He took a sip of the wine in the wine pot and frowned. This wine was very bitter and hot to the throat. Ordinary people would not be able to swallow it. Jian Shursen, what do you mean? Yi Guchen muttered. First, he suddenly attacked him in the sword tomb, and now he warned him with such words. But no matter what, Yi Guchen was not afraid of challenges. He would not give up on the battle of the Sword Sun. In the next few days, Yi Guchen was also meditating and preparing for the journey to the ancient sword tomb. On the other side, the Hua family made a move. Chapter 1029. Tiandu Ridge Hua Family. After the 5 academies competition, the entire Hua family seemed to be shrouded in a layer of dark clouds. It had to be said that Hua Wuxia's failure had disappointed the entire Hua family. Of course, no one dared to say anything to Hua Wuxia. At this moment, the handsome and calm Hua Wuxia, with his hands behind his back, walked to a dusty pavilion. He entered, pressed his hand against the wall, and twisted a button. A deep and dark passage appeared. Hua Wuxia entered, and not long after, light appeared in front of him. Looking around, it was a brightly lit underground secret room. Unlike the dark and damp secret rooms, this secret room was warm and bright. In the secret room, there was a girl who was about 10 years old, playing with a puppet. Seeing Hua Wuxia's arrival, the girl suddenly stood up and hurriedly ran to Hua Wuxia's side saying, "Young Master Hua, is he here? Don't worry, the time is coming. It won't be long before you can meet." Hua Wuxia smiled faintly and reached out to touch the girl's little head. "Is that so? That's great." The girl cheered. Looking at the girl's happy face, Hua Wuxia's eyes flashed with a dark light. "In this Sword Sun battle, what I want is for the individual cultivator camp to be completely annihilated. Dugu Wubai, cherish the last moments of your life." In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed since the 5 academies competition. In this half a month, the entire Sword Dynasty was shaken by Yi Guchen's performance. Some people were even curious about Yi Guchen's performance in the ancient sword tomb. Would he obtain some super powerful swordsmanship inheritance? TSK, Dugu Wubai created unprecedented miracles in Mount Saint Crossing and the Sword Tomb. I wonder if he will perform amazingly in the ancient sword tomb? The ancient sword tomb mainly tests one's understanding of swordsmanship, and even self-created sword moves. Although Dugu Wubai's talent is very strong, he can't be good at everything, right? This time, I heard that the sword sovereign's disciple, Jian Jinghong, is also going to enter the ancient sword tomb. He is a god-favored one with the creation-level sword essence. In terms of swordsmanship, Jian Jinghong is definitely not weaker than Dugu Wubai. Then let's wait and see if Dugu Wubai can continue to be outstanding in the ancient sword tomb this time. Many warriors in the entire Sword Dynasty were also rushing to the ancient sword tomb. They all wanted to know if Yi Guchen, who had created miracles in the 2 mystic realms and the 5 academies competition, could continue his legend in the ancient sword tomb. Within Divine Cliff Academy, after half a month of recuperation, Yi Guchen had finally recovered to his peak state. It's almost time for the ancient sword tomb to open. I'm really looking forward to it, Yi Guchen muttered. There was no doubt that the Sword Sun battle was very dangerous. The ancient sword tomb was the last place where Yi Guchen could improve his strength. He naturally valued it very much. Perhaps it was also a great opportunity to practice the 4 moves of 10,000 God Tribulation, an ultimate sword domain. As soon as Yi Guchen left the cave abode, there were Sacred Cliff College disciples waiting outside to inform Yi Guchen that it was time to set off. Then, Yi Guchen arrived outside Sacred Cliff College. He found that everyone had finished recuperating and was waiting for him. The ancient sword tomb was a rare opportunity, so most of the Sacred Cliff College disciples would go together. Senior Dugu is here. Senior Dugu, are you done recuperating? Many disciples around expressed their concern. Yi Guchen nodded with a faint smile. Although he did not stay in Sacred Cliff College for long, the atmosphere was very good. Of course, this was also because of Yi Guchen's performance. I'm afraid that the entire Sword Dynasty wants to see Brother Duga's performance in the ancient sword tomb, Xuanlian said with a smile. I'll just do my best, Yi Guqin said. Yi Guqin was not a god. He did not think that he could create miracles in any field. I heard that Jian Jinghong will be here too. He's also a prodigy from the Lone Cultivator camp. Maybe you can get to know him, Kempo said. Other than Jian Shisan, the other sword sons from the Lone Cultivator camp were here too. They had entered the ancient sword tomb several times, so they would not enter this time. They were just here to watch the show. I'm also very curious as to how powerful Jian Jinghong, who possesses the sword will of the creation realm, is. Yi Guqin revealed an interested expression. All right, let's go. Beixian Elder waved his hand. He was the leader this time. Then everyone boarded the ship and headed to the ancient sword tomb, Ancient Cloud Ridge. At the same time that Sacred Cliff College set off, the people from the other 4 colleges also headed to Ancient Cloud Ridge. Ancient Cloud Ridge was one of the 360 ridges of the Sword Dynasty. It was famous because of the ancient sword tomb. It was rumored that there was a tablet of Heaven's Way at the ancient sword tomb. Anyone who stood before the tablet of Heaven's Way would be able to comprehend various swordsmanship opportunities. Then many powerful warriors of the Sword Dynasty left their swordsmanship around the tablet of Heaven's Way for future generations to comprehend. Over time, the ancient sword tomb was formed. However, the tablet of Heaven's Way possessed a special power that would be consumed. Therefore, the ancient sword tomb would only open at a specific time. This time, it was opened because of the Sword Sun battle. 2 days later, Sacred Cliff College's ship finally entered Ancient Cloud Ridge. Not long after, Yi Guqin saw a mountain range in front of him. Many densely packed figures covered the ground like a swarm of ants. After hearing the news, many warriors gathered outside the ancient sword tomb. They wanted to see the performance of the disciples from the 5 colleges. Is that the ancient sword tomb? Yi Guqin looked into the distance. In the mountain range in the distance, various sword auras and mysterious auras intertwined. Stone tablets were scattered all over the place. On them were records of the sword techniques and martial arts of the predecessors. In the deepest part of the mountain range, a faint light could be seen. It was as if there was a stone tablet in the middle, releasing a mysterious aura. That should be the tablet of Heaven's Way, Yi Guqin said to himself. At this moment, many people around the ancient sword tomb noticed the arrival of Sacred Cliff College. Sacred Cliff College is here. Is that the natural saint, Duga Wubai? He's indeed extraordinary. I wonder if he can comprehend a profound technique in the ancient sword tomb? That's hard to say. Yi Guqin's arrival undoubtedly caused a stir. At this moment, the people from the other colleges arrived one after another. Almost all of them were from the 5 colleges' grand competition. Hua Wuxiu, Jiang Fengmian, Yinju, Shangguan Jingshan, Ouyang Fengyan, and the others were all there. When they saw Yi Guqin, except for Hua Wuxiu and Jiang Fengmian, the other prodigies on the sword ranking had ugly expressions. I don't believe that you can still create a record in the ancient sword tomb. Yinju gritted his teeth coldly. In the ancient sword tomb, he had witnessed Yi Guqin create a record with his own eyes. Naturally, he did not want to see Yi Guqin continue to be in the limelight in the ancient sword tomb. Dugu Wubai, let's compete again this time. Hua Wuxiu's lips curled into a smile. Sure. Yi Guqin was calm and composed. Just as the two of them were arguing, a person on a sword appeared in the distant sky and rushed over. How can I miss out on such an exciting scene? Accompanied by a voice full of battle intent, a young man with an arrogant posture and high spirits appeared. That's Jian Jinghong. Countless martial artists widened their eyes and exclaimed. Chapter 1030. This young man was dressed in black and had a handsome face. His black hair fluttered in the air, and he had an unruly and wild temperament. He also had a high fighting spirit. The most obvious feature of his body was the pale white sword mark between his eyebrows. It emitted an extremely mysterious wave that was somewhat similar to the heavenly Dao stone tablet. Who else could this person be but Jian Jinghong? The successor of the sword sovereign has finally appeared. Yes, before Dugu Wubai appeared, he was also considered to be the most powerful contender for Jiankui. Jian Jinghong's arrival undoubtedly caused a stir. Yi Guchen also looked over. This was the first time he had seen the second-ranked prodigy on the sword leaderboard. Rumor had it that Jian Jinghong was born with a sword intent between his eyebrows. It was the embryonic form of the heavenly Dao sword intent. The heavenly Dao sword intent was a creation-level sword intent. Even among the creation-level sword intents, it was considered the top. Therefore, even if it was just the embryonic form of the heavenly Dao sword intent, Jian Jinghong's talent in the sword Dao far exceeded that of ordinary people. Previously in the 3 heavenly gates test, Jian Jinghong's talent was ranked first. Later on, he was surpassed by Yi Guchen. Seeing Jian Jinghong's arrival, the prodigies on the side of the aristocratic families all had extremely solemn expressions. Even Hua Wuxia frowned slightly. Jian Jinghong was indeed a big threat. This person's aura is actually somewhat similar to the heavenly Dao stone tablet. Yi Guchen was slightly surprised. He felt that Jian Jinghong's entire body carried a special aura, as if he had merged with the heavenly Dao. It was a complete and flawless body. No wonder before coming to the ancient sword tomb he had heard of the 9th level. This time, the person most likely to break the record in the ancient sword tomb was Jian Jinghong. This was because his aura was too compatible with the heavenly Dao stone tablet. Seeing Jian Jinghong's arrival, there was another person who could not calm down. It was the pride of Tianxian College, Suki Miyazaki. She was previously the pride of the heavenly Dao, ranked 8th on the sword leaderboard. She was proud and arrogant and somewhat overbearing. However, in a spar, she had been defeated by Jian Jinghong. From then on, he saw Jian Jinghong as his goal. Even the newly risen Yi Guchen, she did not think that he could compare to Jian Jinghong. Jian Jinghong, you finally appeared. This time, I'm going to compete with you again in the ancient sword tomb. Suki Miyazaki muttered to herself. However, Jian Jinghong did not notice Suki Miyazaki at all. Instead, he looked at Yi Guchen and said with some interest, "You're the newly risen natural saint, the Dugu Wubai who broke my record in the sword catacomb." Seeing is believing. In Jian Jinghong's eyes, Yi Guchen's aura was deep and reserved. His body also seemed to contain a trace of an aura that made him somewhat fearful. Jian Jinghong possessed the embryonic form of the heavenly Dao sword intent. Something that even the embryonic form of the heavenly Dao sword intent feared was enough to pique Jian Jinghong's interest. Naturally, he did not know that Yi Guchen had also comprehended the creation-level sword intent of all creation. Hearing Jian Jinghong's words, Yi Guchen smiled faintly and cupped his hands slightly. "Jian Jinghong, I've heard a lot about you." No matter what, Jian Jinghong was sword sovereign Yi Tianqing's disciple. Yi Guchen had a good impression of Yi Tianqing. His disciple's character should not be too bad. And from the looks of it, Yi Tianqing did not tell Jian Jinghong his true identity. Although we can't compete in martial arts in the ancient sword tomb this time, there are very few who can beat me in terms of sword comprehension. Jian Jinghong smiled. This was not arrogance or insolence. It was the truth. I don't seek fame when comprehending sword techniques. What suits me is the best, Yi Guchen replied calmly. He did not intend to purposely break any records. He would let nature take its course. As expected of a natural saint who has caught the eye of master. When the time comes for the battle to become the sword sun, I'll help you block that Jiankui. Jian Jinghong laughed heartily when he heard that. Yi Guchen was a prodigy from the itinerant cultivator camp. He had interacted with Yi Tianqing before. Jian Jinghong naturally had a good impression of Yi Guchen. Of course, his eyes were also surging with battle intent. If there was a chance, he would definitely spar with Yi Guchen. Thank you. Yi Guchen nodded. In fact, he did not need the help of others to deal with Jiankui. However, there was no need to say it out loud. The prodigies from the 5 great academies of the Sword Dynasty and Jian Jinghong were all present. Only the mysterious prodigy who ranked first on the sword leaderboard, Z, did not come. Brother Jian, is the person ranked first on the sword leaderboard not coming? Yi Guchen was a little curious. He had been in the Sword Dynasty for so long, but he had never seen Z, who had suppressed all the prodigies on the sword leaderboard. Yi Guchen was also curious about this prodigy who could suppress Jian Jinghong and Hua Wuxiu. That freak. Jian Jinghong's expression did not look very good. Oh. Yi Guchen raised his eyebrows. Don't worry about him. In fact, I don't know who he is either. His identity is a mystery, and he's extremely powerful. In short, just don't provoke him. He won't interfere in the battle between the itinerant cultivators and the aristocratic families, Jian Jinghong said. Yi Guchen nodded slightly. A moment later, Beixian Elder and the other leaders of the 5 great academies stepped out at the same time, holding a seal in their hands. The 5 of them activated their seals at the same time. In an instant, the entire mountain range shook. Formation patterns appeared on the ground and melted like snow. There was a formation around the ancient sword tomb. Only when the 5 seals were activated at the same time could the formation be undone. As the formation was undone, an even more powerful and mysterious aura spread out like a geyser. Some of the martial artists and sword cultivators standing at the edge of the ancient sword tomb felt their 5 senses become clearer, and their sea of consciousness became extremely clear. Some of the sword techniques that were difficult to cultivate were also enlightened at this moment. What a mysterious aura! Yi Guchen's eyes lit up. It was different from the sword tomb. The sword tomb focused on the cultivation of sword intent. The ancient sword tomb, on the other hand, sharpened one's 5 senses and made one's mind more flexible. It also allowed one to have an epiphany and cultivate various sword techniques with ease. Prodigies, you may enter now. Whether or not you can comprehend the sword techniques of the predecessors will depend on your luck. Also, those who are capable can use the Heavenly Tao Stone Tablet to practice your own sword techniques, but don't force yourself. An elder from the academy said. Most prodigies had a chance to comprehend the sword techniques of the predecessors. The only difference was that the sword techniques they comprehended varied in strength. However, using the Heavenly Tao Stone Tablet to create one's own sword technique was 1 in a million. Many of the sword techniques that people created were simply useless or extremely weak and worthless. There were very few people who could really create a martial art that was comparable to an emperor-level sword technique. Therefore, most of the prodigies did not have the ability to create their own sword techniques. This time, Jian Jinghong is most likely to create his own sword technique. After all, he has the embryonic form of the Heavenly Tao Sword Intent, and will resonate with the Heavenly Tao Stone Tablet. Hua Wuxiu is also likely. His light and darkness sage constitution is enough for him to comprehend the light and darkness sword Tao. Some of the martial artists could not help but guess. Self-created unique techniques? I'm looking forward to it. Yi Guchen's eyes flickered as he stepped into the ancient sword tomb with the other prodigies. Chapter 1031. As one of the 4 secret realms of the Sword Dynasty, the opening of the ancient sword tomb was very rare. Therefore, all the Sky Prides could not wait to enter the tomb. Dugu, there's a time limit to the opening of the ancient sword tomb, so you don't have to comprehend the most difficult sword moves. It's best to comprehend the most suitable ones. Beixian Elder's voice suddenly sounded in Yi Guchen's ears. Beixian Elder was also a little worried that Yi Guchen would choose the most difficult sword moves and waste a lot of time. In the past, there were many talented Sky Prides who were proud and arrogant, and chose difficult sword moves that they could not comprehend. In the end, all their efforts were in vain. With Yi Guchen's current reputation, it would be a little embarrassing if such a situation occurred. Elder, don't worry. Yi Guchen nodded. He would not make such a low-level mistake. As soon as Yi Guchen stepped into the ancient sword tomb, he immediately felt a different aura. There were stone tablets all over the mountain range. In addition, there were many sword marks left behind by predecessors on the walls of the isolated cliff. There were also sword move scrolls left behind by predecessors in some stone caves. All in all, there were definitely many opportunities for swordsmanship in the ancient sword tomb. However, it was not that easy to comprehend them. Otherwise, everyone would be able to obtain an emperor-level sword technique. Sigh. I wonder how many Sky Prides will be able to comprehend an emperor-level sword technique this time. Yes, most of the sword moves left behind in the ancient sword tomb are obscure and difficult to comprehend. Ordinary sky prides can only comprehend a supreme-level king-level sword technique at most. As for an emperor-level sword technique, even an inferior level one is difficult to comprehend. As all the sky prides entered the ancient sword tomb, the martial artists surrounding the tomb began to whisper to each other. I hope Wuxia will be able to gain something this time, Hua Imo muttered on the ship of Tensei College. Hua Yintao did not come this time. He must have been very angry with Yi Guqin last time. At this moment, some geniuses had already found the lost sword moves, and were preparing to comprehend them on their own. A Sacred Cliff College disciple was sitting cross-legged in front of a ruin. He suddenly took out a leaf and put it in his mouth to comprehend it. That's an epiphany leaf. Sacred Cliff College is so extravagant. They actually give it to ordinary students? Some warriors saw it and found it inconceivable. However, that was not all. One by one, the Sacred Cliff College students found their own spots and began to comprehend the swordsmanship. They all took out the leaf of enlightenment. What the hell? Everyone was dumbfounded. Even Hua Emo and Elder Ainli from Long River College were stunned. Since when did the Tree of Enlightenment become so worthless? Looking at this situation, the Heavenly Saint Sun Moon and Long River disciples who had entered the ancient sword tomb turned as black as the bottom of a pot. One could imagine how effective the Enlightenment leaf was in comprehending sword moves. Yes and no were two completely different concepts. Bei Xian, why does Sacred Cliff College have so many epiphany leaves? Hua Imo couldn't help but ask. Could it be that Sacred Cliff College has an epiphany ancient tree? However, the epiphany ancient tree was the top and rarest sacred herb. Usually, only the overlord forces would have such a good item. Would I tell you? Bei Xian Elder looked at Hua Imo as if he was an idiot. For a moment, the faces of the elders from the three major academies in the aristocratic family camp were as black as the bottom of a pot. Looking at this scene, Yi Guqin smiled faintly and didn't say anything. Of course, he was the one who took out the epiphany leaves. However, he only told Bei Xian Elder that he had a chance encounter and obtained some epiphany leaves. This was Yi Guqin's way of repaying Sacred Cliff College's kindness in cultivating him. It was conceivable that the Sacred Cliff College disciples who had the epiphany leaves would gain more than the other four academies. At this moment, Ling Yamoshu came in front of a stone tablet, his eyes shining brightly. This is the sword technique I need. Ling Yamoshu sat down without hesitation, took out the epiphany leaf, and began to comprehend it. Hey, that stone tablet seems to have recorded the left-handed Grandmaster Song Qiuyu's inferior emperor-level sword technique. Some martial artists could not help but exclaim in surprise when they saw the place where Ling Mashu sat cross-legged. Although there were many inheritances in the ancient sword tomb, there were only a few emperor-level sword techniques, so it was easy to identify them. However, it was easy to find them, but difficult to comprehend them. I hope this kid can succeed, Bei Xian Elder murmured. In addition, Xuanlian also sat in front of a mountain wall to comprehend the martial arts left behind by a Buddhist swordsman. Kong Kong Ling Mayin, Han Lingxian, and the others did the same. They found suitable sword techniques, and took out the epiphany leaves to comprehend. Only a few people from the Divine Cliff Academy were left, and they were still searching. Yi Guqin was one of them. It was not that Yi Guqin was arrogant but incompetent. It was just an ordinary inferior emperor-level sword technique, which was not very useful to Yi Guqin. His godly sword lightning controlling technique, and the three ultimate holy swords were not weak. Therefore, Yi Guqin needed a sword technique of a higher level. As time passed, the prodigies also began to comprehend. I've finally found it. Shangguan Jingshan sat in front of a flaming stone tablet, his eyes flashing with fire. Yinju, Jiangfengnian, Ouyangfengnian, and the others also found inferior emperor-level sword techniques suitable for them. Mu Xingzu, under the guidance of Yingning in her mind, found a sword technique that cultivated soul attacks and began to comprehend it. In the end, only Jian Jinghong, Hua Wuxiao, and Yi Guqin had not made a choice. Interesting. One of them is ranked second on the sword leaderboard, the other is ranked third, and the other is a born saint. They haven't found a sword technique suitable for them. Maybe they're ambitious and don't want to choose inferior emperor-level sword techniques. Outside the ancient sword tomb, the crowd was discussing. At that moment, Jian Jinghong stood in front of a jade tablet, his eyes surging with light. That stone tablet, could it be left behind by the Sky Sword Sage? Rumor has it that the sword technique recorded on the stone tablet is a superior emperor-level sword technique. It's said that when this technique is used, the sword chi will seal the heavens and the earth. It's extremely powerful. Seeing Jian Jinghong's choice, the crowd outside the ancient sword tomb exclaimed. It was a superior emperor-level sword technique. Although there was only a difference of 1 grade between inferior and medial level, the difficulty of comprehending and the power was worlds apart. At the same time, Wuxia also found a stone tablet. That stone tablet was left behind by an ancestor of the Sword Dynasty, a false saint expert. It also records a superior emperor-level sword technique. Jian Jinghong and Wuxia's choices shocked the crowd. The other prodigies on the sword leaderboard might not succeed in comprehending an inferior emperor-level sword technique. Both of them chose the more difficult intermediate emperor-level sword technique. At that moment, everyone's eyes could not help but look at Yi Guqin. What kind of technique would the famous born saint of the Sword Dynasty choose to comprehend? Yi Guqin's footsteps moved. He went deep into the ancient sword tomb, and finally stood in front of the 8 majestic mountains. These 8 mountains were very conspicuous in the ancient sword tomb. Yi Guqin looked up and saw that each of the 8 mountains had a sword mark that was 1,000 feet long. It was as if the whole mountain had been divided into 2. Most of the sword techniques in the ancient sword tomb were recorded on the stone tablets. Only this sword technique was recorded on the 8 towering mountains. That sword technique is... When they saw Yi Guqin standing in front of the 8 mountains, everyone seemed to have stopped breathing. Their pupils shrank and they looked extremely surprised. Chapter 1032. That sword art was left behind by my Sword Dynasty's Sword Dao Alliance master, the proud divine continent. Bei Xian Elder's pupils widened, his breathing quickened, and he muttered absent-mindedly. The Sword Dao Alliance master, the proud divine continent, was definitely a legendary figure in the Sword Dynasty. His strength was extraordinary, and ordinary false saints were no match for him. It could be said that part of the reason why the Sword Dynasty could become the leader of the 100 great dynasties and suppress the war god, Maluo, domineering blade, and other top dynasties was because of the proud divine continent. Within the dynasty, there was a legend. The proud divine continent actually had the ability to directly become a heavenly tribulation saint. However, he was not satisfied with this. He wanted to achieve perfection in his sword Dao and break into the saint realm in the most perfect state. Therefore, he entered the heavenless sword realm to find an opportunity, and was trapped inside. It could be said that the sword art left behind by such a legendary figure was absolutely extraordinary and exquisite. No one expected that Yi Guqin would stop before the sword art left behind by the proud divine continent. I remember that the 8 peaks recorded a sword art left behind by the Alliance Master, the proud divine continent. I'm afraid the grade has reached the level of a high-grade emperor-level sword art. Many warriors could not hide the surprise on their faces. In the past, when the ancient sword tomb opened, it was not that there were no geniuses who chose to comprehend the sword art of the proud divine continent. But in the end, without exception, they all failed. Therefore, Wuxia, Jian Jinghong, and the others did not choose this sword art. Firstly, it was not suitable, and secondly, it was too difficult. The difficulty of comprehending a mid-grade emperor-level sword art was several times higher than that of a low-grade one. And the difficulty of a high-grade emperor-level sword art was even higher than that of a mid-grade emperor-level sword art. Duguwubai won't really choose this sword art, right? Outside the ancient sword tomb, everyone was watching. They all wanted to know what choice Yi Guqin would make. Humph, ignorant child. How can anyone comprehend the absolute art left behind by the Alliance Master? Huayamo smiled coldly. If the sword art of the proud divine continent was so easy to comprehend, then there would have been geniuses who would have comprehended it long ago. At this moment, Yi Guqin sat cross-legged in front of the 8 peaks, took out the epiphany leaf, put it in his mouth, and began to comprehend. He really chose the Alliance Master's absolute art. Seeing this, a commotion broke out outside the ancient sword tomb. The sword technique left behind by the proud divine continent could be said to be one of the most difficult sword techniques to comprehend in the ancient sword tomb. It wasn't just the people in the outer circle. Even some of the sky prides in the ancient sword tomb were slightly alarmed as they looked in the direction of Yiguchen. In front of a stone tablet, Suki Miyazaki opened her beautiful eyes and looked in Yiguchen's direction. Then she shook her head slightly. You didn't even choose Jian Jinghong. Can you really comprehend it? Even Jian Jinghong, who possessed the embryonic form of the heavenly Tao sword intent, did not choose that sword art. It would be very difficult for Yiguchen to comprehend it. Oh, interesting. Jian Jinghong was also surprised by Yiguchen's choice. Dugu Bai, are you really capable, or are you just putting on a front? Hua Wuxia muttered to himself. He no longer dared to underestimate Yiguchen. In the sky, several sword suns stood side by side. Jianxi clicked his tongue and said, Dugu Wubai's actions are slightly unwise. Not to mention whether he can comprehend it in the end. Even if he can, it will almost exhaust his time. After that, I'm afraid he won't have much time to go to the heavenly Tao stone tablet to comprehend it. I believe that Brother Dugu has his own thoughts. Have you ever seen him suffer a loss? Kenpo said with a smile. I haven't. Jianxi was at a loss for words. Since Yiguchen's rise, he seemed to have never suffered a loss. Ignoring the discussions outside, Yiguchen was immersed in comprehending within the ancient sword tomb. With his talent, sword demon's comprehension, and the enlightenment ancient tree in his body constantly releasing Tao aura, Yiguchen believed that he was confident that he could comprehend the sword technique left behind by the proud divine continent. He released his soul stone and enveloped the 8 mountain peaks. Vaguely, Yiguchen seemed to see an incomparably imposing figure with his back facing him. He held the sword in his hand and suddenly swung it out. The moment the sword was unleashed, the sky seemed to be about to collapse. Unleashing the second sword, the earth seemed to be about to shatter. The third sword was unleashed, sword chi swept out like a tsunami. The fourth sword, the sword momentum was like a wildfire. Then the fifth sword, the sixth sword, each sword corresponded to the sword mark on a mountain peak. The 8 mountain peaks represented the proud divine continent. This sword move had a total of 8 moves. After roughly comprehending, Yiguchen also finally knew the name of this sword move. 8 Extreme Reincarnation Sword Art. What a profound sword technique. This sword move uses the 8 trigrams as the foundation. Each trigram corresponds to a sword. The power reaches high-grade emperor-level sword technique. If the 8 swords are unleashed at the same time, heaven and earth reincarnate. The power is even comparable to a supreme-grade emperor-level sword technique. Yiguchen was slightly amazed in his heart. The 8 trigrams were Qian, Koan, Ken, Li, Sun, Zhen, Zhen, Dui. They corresponded to heaven, earth, water, fire, wind, thunder, mountain, pond. Each trigram represented a sword move. In the end, if the 8 moves could be combined, the power would probably reach the peak of an emperor-level sword technique. This sword technique is indeed more powerful than the 3 ultimate holy swords, and the divine sword lightning controlling technique. Yiguchen was excited. Of course, the difficulty of comprehending it was proportional to its power. Even with Yiguchen's ability, it was not that easy to comprehend it. However, Yiguchen was also confident. He was completely immersed in comprehending it. Time also passed day by day. Generally speaking, the ancient sword tomb would be open for a month. However, this time, because of the sword master battle, the time was extended to 2 months. However, even if it was 2 months, it was extremely difficult to comprehend a low-grade emperor-level sword technique, not to mention mid-grade and superior-grade ones. In addition, there was still the heavenly Tao stone tablet to comprehend. Although ordinary geniuses did not have the ability to create their own sword techniques, they could at least use the heavenly Tao stone tablet to improve their sword techniques. It would also take a lot of time to comprehend in the heavenly Tao stone tablet. In this way, the 2 months were even more pressing. In the blink of an eye, more than half a month had passed. Many of the geniuses opened their tired eyes, their faces ashen. Most of the geniuses had failed to comprehend a low-grade emperor-level sword technique. Those who had comprehended a supreme-grade emperor-level sword technique had all succeeded. Sigh, it's still too difficult. Some geniuses shook their heads. The people outside also saw all of this. They were not surprised. Suddenly, sword chi fluctuations burst out from a place in the ancient sword tomb. Hey, a genius has succeeded. It's Ling Emoshu from Sacred Cliff College. Many people were attracted. They looked over and saw Ling Emoshu holding a sword in his left hand. The sword chi was unparalleled. He had comprehended a low-grade emperor-level sword technique. Not long after, Ling Maoyin, Kong Kong, Xuanlian Muxingzu, and the others' bodies shook. They had also comprehended their own sword techniques. Could it be because of the Epiphany Leaf? Seeing this, the crowd could not help but guess. Quite a few of the Divine Cliff Academy's disciples had succeeded in comprehending it. This made the faces of Hua Mo and the other elders of the aristocratic families darken. Is there still no movement from Dugu Wu Bai? Ling Maoyin's eyes were slightly worried. Trust Brother Dugu. Let's go to the heavenly Dao stone tablet first, Ling Emoshu said. Time was of the essence. After a few more days, Jiang Fengmian Yinju, Shengguan Jingshan, and the others had also comprehended one after another. As the top 10 of the sword roll, they were still very talented. Dugu Wu Bai, a greedy snake wants to swallow an elephant. Yinju sneered and rushed to the location of the heavenly Dao stone tablet. Chapter 1033. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. There was only a month left before the ancient sword tomb closed. During this month, a small number of prodigies managed to comprehend the sword technique. Most of the prodigies failed. However, regardless of whether they succeeded or failed, there was a place they had to go. That was where the heavenly Dao stone tablet was located. Although not everyone could use the heavenly Dao stone tablet to create their own sword technique. However, it also had the effect of assisting in the cultivation of sword techniques. Comprehending some profound sword techniques by the side of the heavenly Dao stone tablet would yield great results. Therefore, regardless of whether they succeeded in comprehending the sword technique, all the prodigies rushed to the center of the ancient sword tomb, where the heavenly Dao stone tablet was located. There were only 3 people left who had not rushed to the heavenly Dao stone tablet. Yi Guqin, Jian Jinghong, and Hua Wuxiao. Will the 3 of them miss the chance to comprehend the heavenly Dao stone tablet? Yes, although comprehending the sword technique is important, the heavenly Dao stone tablet is more important. Yes, the 3 of them all have the potential to create their own sword techniques. It's a pity that they missed the heavenly Dao stone tablet. Outside the ancient sword tomb, the crowd was discussing. A month had passed, but the 3 of them did not make any moves. However, a few days later, there was a strange movement on Hua Wuxiao's side. He suddenly opened his eyes, and a black and white sword chi rushed into the sky as if it was going to shake the clouds. I succeeded. Hua Wuxiao stood up. His handsome face was expressionless, but there was a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. He had successfully comprehended the mid-tier emperor-level sword technique. He actually succeeded in comprehending the mid-tier emperor-level sword technique. Seeing this scene, countless exclamations rang out. Haha, no wonder he has no cultivation. Hua Mo laughed and was in a good mood. On the other hand, Beixian Elder was a little uncomfortable. Not long after, there was also a movement on Jian Jinghong's side. He opened his eyes, and his gaze was as sharp as a sword. He stretched out his hand and displayed his sword. Sword chi spread out like silk, as if it was going to seal the entire sky. Jian Jinghong had also comprehended the mid-tier emperor-level sword technique, and it was flawless. As expected of the sword sovereign's disciple, Jian Jinghong has also succeeded. He possesses the embryonic form of the heavenly Dao sword intent. It would be strange if he didn't succeed. He hasn't succeeded yet? Jian Jinghong turned to look at Yi Guqin, frowning slightly. Looks like Dugu Wu Bai won't have a chance. I'd like to see if you can use the heavenly Dao stone tablet to create your own sword technique, Hua Wuxiao said indifferently. In any case, I won't be weaker than you, Jian Jinghong retorted. One of them was the disciple of the Sword Sovereign, while the other was the genius of the Hua family. Naturally, they were on opposing sides. After that, the two of them headed straight for the heavenly Dao stone tablet. In the entire ancient sword tomb, Yi Guchen was the only one who was still meditating. Sigh. Beixian elder sighed deeply. His face was full of worry. Heh. Old ghost Beixian, you look very vexed. Hua Mo couldn't help but mock. He could finally see Yi Guchen being defeated. Humph, the results aren't out yet. Don't laugh too early, Beixian elder said harshly. Even if this kid manages to comprehend the sword technique of the proud god continent, he will still use up all his time and miss the opportunity to enter the heavenly Dao stone tablet. Hua Mo pointed out. Beixian elder couldn't refute that. Looks like Dugu Wubai picked up a sesame seed and threw away a watermelon. He might not even be able to pick up a sesame seed. After all, how can the sword technique left behind by the Alliance Master be so easy to comprehend? Everyone was discussing fervently. However, none of the noise outside could disturb Yi Guchen. Since he had chosen the most difficult sword technique, he naturally had to comprehend it. At the same time, the other geniuses had all gathered around the heavenly Dao stone tablet. The heavenly Dao stone tablet was about 100 feet tall. It looked as gentle as jade, like a huge pebble. Its surface was covered with many natural Dao patterns, as if it was describing the principles of heaven and earth. At this moment, the surface of the heavenly Dao stone tablet was covered with a layer of hazy brilliance. Every genius who got close to the heavenly Dao stone tablet was illuminated by a ray of brilliance. The heavenly Dao stone tablet makes one's mind clear and enlightened. Many of the difficulties in practicing the sword technique suddenly become clear. It's indeed the heavenly Dao stone tablet. After receiving the benefits, all the geniuses were pleasantly surprised. The people of Sacred Cliff College also received many benefits. In particular, the geniuses who were more talented received more brilliance. Kong Kong and Mu Xingzu were shrouded in brilliance and looked extremely sacred. The two of them had a unique Kong Kong physique, while Mu Xingzu received the inheritance of Ing Ning's immortal soul pearl. Both of them were regarded as geniuses above the 7th grade. In addition, Hua Wuxia, who had just arrived, also received a lot of brilliance. Of course, the most shocking thing was Jian Jinghong. The sword mark between his eyebrows suddenly emitted a strange fluctuation. A majestic and vast sword intent spread out, as if it was the heavenly Dao. The heavenly Dao stone tablet released even more brilliance, which enhanced Jian Jinghong's body, causing his entire body to shine brilliantly. As expected of the Sword Sovereign's disciple, Beixian elder and the others exclaimed, "Is that the power of the embryonic form of the heavenly Dao sword intent?" Many geniuses beside the heavenly Dao stone tablet were shocked when they felt the fluctuation. The enhancement that Jian Jinghong received was enough to match a group of geniuses. Hua Wuxia, let's compete again later. Jian Jinghong's lips curled into a smile. Umph. Hua Wuxia snorted coldly and sat cross-legged on the ground. Both he and Jian Jinghong were ambitious existences. Not only did they want to use the heavenly Dao stone tablet to comprehend the previous swordsmanship, but they also wanted to use it to create their own sword moves. I've already comprehended that trump card. Next, I'll use the heavenly Dao stone tablet to perfect it. This will become my greatest killing weapon. Even Jian Jinghong might not be able to beat me, Hua Wuxia murmured to himself. With the help of the heavenly Dao stone tablet and the embryonic form of the heavenly Dao sword intent, I can also create my own swordsmanship. Jian Jinghong's eyes were filled with determination. At this moment, everyone's eyes fell on the two of them. In this ancient sword tomb, Jian Jinghong and Hua Wuxia were undoubtedly the two most likely to create their own swordsmanship. As for Yi Guchen, he seemed to have been forgotten. Although I have to admit that Dugu Wubai is talented, I'm afraid he'll really be defeated in the ancient sword tomb this time. Some of the spectators shook their heads and sighed. They all felt that it was a pity. Yi Guchen could continue to set records in the ancient sword tomb. That was equivalent to winning 3 consecutive championships in Mount St. Crossing, the Sword Tomb, and the Ancient Sword Tomb. This was a record that no Sky Pride in the Sword Dynasty had ever achieved. Time passed in the blink of an eye. Another half a month had passed. There was only half a month left before the ancient sword tomb closed. The sky prides around the heavenly Dao stone tablet had gained a lot. In particular, top sky prides such as Jian Jinghong and Hua Wuxiu had made great progress in this half a month. Only Yi Guqin was still comprehending his swordsmanship. The natural saint is done for this time. Just as everyone was sighing, the entire ancient sword tomb suddenly trembled. Ha! Everyone was shocked and turned to look at the source of the tremors. It was the 8 mountains. Yi Guqin, who had been sitting cross-legged in front of the 8 mountains for 1.5 months, finally opened his eyes. In an instant, the 8 mountains roared at the same time. Sword light lit up the sky and the sky shook. Chapter 1034. Rumble. The 8 mountains that recorded the 8 extremities reincarnation sword technique shook at the same time, causing the entire ancient sword tomb to tremble. Even the sky prides who were sitting around the heavenly Dao steel were shocked. They looked in the direction of Yi Guqin with astonishment. That's where Dugu Wubai comprehended. Did he comprehend the alliance leader's sword technique? That might be the case. He managed to comprehend an upper emperor sword technique in just 1.5 months. Such talent is worthy of the title of a natural saint. The sky prides exclaimed. Did he really comprehend it? Hua Wuxiu frowned slightly, but he soon felt relieved. No matter what, Yi Guqin had already spent 1.5 months. How much could he gain from the heavenly Dao steel in the remaining half a month? No wonder Master told me that Dugu Wubai is no ordinary person. He even managed to comprehend the alliance leader's unique skill. It's a pity that he wasted so much time. Jian Jinghong shook his head. Yi Tianqing had once told him not to get on the bad side of Yi Guqin. So what if he comprehended the sword technique? It's unwise to miss the heavenly Dao steel. Suki Miyazaki shook her head and sighed. Because of Mu Xingzu, she had always been biased against Yi Guqin. Everyone inside and outside the ancient sword tomb was amazed. Yi Guqin, on the other hand, was excited. On the 8 giant peaks, 8 different sword scars seemed to have turned into 8 runes and entered his mind. They were Qian Kuan, Qin Li Sun, Zhen Zhen and Dui runes. The essence of the 8 extremities reincarnation sword technique turned into 8 trigrams runes, and was completely imprinted in Yi Guqin's mind. Although he couldn't unleash the full power of the 8 extremities reincarnation sword technique, as long as he remembered it, he would be able to cultivate it to perfection in the future. That's right, there's another great opportunity in the ancient sword tomb. It's the heavenly Dao steel. I can use the heavenly Dao steel's power to cultivate the 8 extremities reincarnation sword technique. Yi Guqin thought to himself. Comprehending the sword technique in the ancient sword tomb was only memorizing it. It did not mean that one would be able to cultivate it. It was impossible to cultivate an emperor sword technique in just 1 or 2 months. However, with the help of the heavenly Dao stone tablet, Yi Guqin was confident that he could perform a few basic sword moves of the Baji Samsara sword technique. Not only that, but he could also use it to comprehend the 4th move of the 10,000 Gods Tribulation, Ultimate Sword Domain, and so on. There was also the Sword Sect's ultimate technique, the Reincarnation Sword Lotus. Previously, Yi Guqin's cultivation base was at 108 leaves. He could use this opportunity to transform again. Time reincarnation steelies SSS with the ancient sword heavenly Dao steels, the steel's heavenly Dao steel. Heavens soon after steels, reincarnation steels. The many prodigies around the heavenly Dao steel looked at him. As expected of senior brother Dugu, he can even comprehend the alliance leader's ultimate technique. That's right. Look, senior brother Dugu is a natural-born saint. Some of the prodigies from Sacred Cliff College had looks of admiration in their eyes. It was a high-grade emperor sword technique. Moreover, it was the ultimate technique of the proud divine continent. This was unprecedented. So what if you've comprehended the alliance leader's ultimate technique? The true opportunity lies in the heavenly Dao steel, Shangguan Jingshan said with a cold snort. As soon as Shangguan Jingshan finished speaking, the atmosphere fell silent. Indeed, Yi Guqin only had half a month to comprehend the heavenly Dao steel. Even Hua Wuxiu and Jian Jinghong had a month to comprehend the heavenly Dao steel. The gap between them was huge. "There's no need to worry," Yi Guqin said indifferently. He approached the heavenly Dao steel. "A waste of time is a waste of time. It's hard to make up for it," Inju said sarcastically. These prodigies had lost to Yi Guqin in the 5 Academies tournament. They couldn't wait to see Yi Guqin suffer in the ancient sword tomb. Just as Yi Guqin approached the heavenly Dao steel, the heavenly Dao steel trembled. The heavenly Dao stone tablet shook violently. Then, under the watchful eyes of all the geniuses, a turbulent brilliance poured out and sprinkled on Yi Guqin. That vigorous and profound power was even stronger than Jian Jinghong's by a few notches. Inside the ancient sword tomb, all the prodigies were stunned. Outside the ancient sword tomb, the faces of Hua Emo, Yinli, and the other family elders were also incomparably numb, as if weathered by the wind. No one had expected that Yi Guqin could trigger such a reaction from the heavenly Dao steel. Even Jian Jinghong was taken aback. Besides the embryonic form of the heavenly Dao sword intent, there was another secret behind why he could trigger the brilliance of the heavenly Dao steel. Could it be? Jian Jinghong thought of something and suddenly felt a burning sensation on the back of his hand. As expected, he's also. Jian Jinghong thought to himself. At the same time, Yi Guqin was bathed in the brilliance of the heavenly Dao steel, and felt that his comprehension ability had multiplied. Yi Guqin was not surprised by the heavenly Dao steel's reaction. It was rumored that the heavenly Dao steel emitted brilliance according to the prodigy's talent. For example, Jian Jinghong, Hua Wuxia, and the other prodigies would receive more brilliance. Yi Guqin was a 7th grade prodigy. Coupled with the 9 Tribulations Heart Sutra, he had a perfect physical body, a limitless sea of energy, and a chaotic sea of consciousness. Such talent was second to none even in the entire Nantian region. Perhaps only 10th grade prodigies like Di Haoyan were qualified to compete with him in terms of talent. In addition to this reason, Yi Guqin's hand was also burning. There seemed to be a sword-shaped insignia on the back of his hand, but it was not very obvious in the brilliance. As expected, Yi Guqin also sensed Jian Jinghong at the same time. Jian Jinghong was also a 9th-generation sword master sequence. It seems that the sequence insignia will give the heavenly Dao steel additional support. Could it be that the heavenly Dao steel is also related to the sword master sequence? Yi Guqin could not help but guess. However, Yi Guqin's priority was still to cultivate. He sat cross-legged around the heavenly Dao steel, and began to comprehend. What the hell? Even Ouyang Fingyun's expression turned ugly. How much can you gain in half a month? Shangguan Jingshin Inju, and the others did not think much of it. Then many prodigies also calmed down, and made the best use of the remaining time. Another 7 days passed. Some prodigies tried to touch the heavenly Dao steel after comprehending the swordsmanship. They wanted to enter the heavenly Dao steel, and create their own swordsmanship. However, without exception, all of them were bounced off. Only those who had the ability to create their own swordsmanship could enter the space of the heavenly Dao steel. I wonder if there's anyone who can create their own swordsmanship and trigger the heavenly Dao steel's light. Yeah, I'm curious too. Previously, when someone created their own swordsmanship and triggered the heavenly Dao steel's light, the highest was a white brilliance of 500 feet. This time, Jian Jinghong and Hua Wuxia both have a chance to break the record of 500 feet. It's a pity that Dugu Wubai only has half a month. It's probably difficult for him to digest the swordsmanship that he comprehended previously, let alone create his own swordsmanship. Outside the ancient sword tomb, the crowd discussed fervently. At this moment, Hua Wuxia, who had been sitting cross-legged, finally stood up and stepped towards the heavenly Dao steel. His gaze was deep as he placed his hand on it. In an instant, a light flashed and Hua Wuxia's body was pulled into the space of the heavenly Dao steel. Hua Wuxia can really create his own swordsmanship. Seeing this scene, the crowd was in an uproar. Chapter 1035. It was not easy to create one's own swordsmanship. It required one to be extremely talented and have a deep understanding of swordsmanship. Generally speaking, those who were able to create their own swordsmanship were top experts who had dabbled in the power of law, or sword Dao masters who had been immersed in swordsmanship for more than a few decades. Hua Wuxiu was only in his 20s. Although everyone had guessed that Hua Wuxiu might create his own swordsmanship, they were still amazed when they saw it for themselves. I wonder how much light Hua Wuxiu's self-created swordsmanship will be able to attract from the heavenly Dao stone tablet? It doesn't matter how much light it gets, it's still better than ours. The surrounding sky prides were envious. No matter how powerful the swordsmanship was, as long as it could be created, it was enough to make others envious. It seems that Wuxiu will have a great harvest this time. Huaimo nodded in satisfaction. Although Huaimo was a little unhappy that Yi Guqin had comprehended the proud divine continent's unique swordsmanship. Fortunately, Hua Wuxiu still had the ability to create his own swordsmanship. What about Yi Guqin? With only half a month left, it was difficult to consolidate the swordsmanship that he had comprehended, let alone create his own swordsmanship. What a pity! Dugu Wubai is a natural sage. If he had enough time, he might be able to create his own swordsmanship. Outside the ancient sword tomb, some martial artists were discussing among themselves. They felt that it was a pity. After all, Yi Guqin's performance at Mount Saint Crossing had really amazed everyone. Beixian Elder and the rest sighed and did not say anything. After all, they could not force Yi Guqin to break the records in all 3 secret realms. That would be too much. Another 2 days passed. On this day, the heavenly Dao stone tablet suddenly released a dazzling white light. The light condensed into a pillar of light that shot up into the sky. Hua Wuxiu has successfully created his own swordsmanship. The surrounding sky prides could not help but exclaim. The dazzling white pillar of light rose up into the sky and finally stopped at a range of 6,000 feet. Hua Wuxiu has broken the record. Inside and outside the ancient sword tomb, everyone's eyes were fixed on the white light pillar that gushed towards the heavens. The height of the light pillar represented the power and complexity of the self-created sword art. The more complex and profound the sword art was, the more powerful it would be, and the higher the height of the light beam would be. Among the previous generations of geniuses, the record was 5,000 feet. Today, however, Hua Wuxiu had broken the previous record. This also meant that the moves he created were more complicated and more powerful than those of his predecessors. In front of the heavenly Dao stone tablet, a burst of light surged, and Hua Wuxiu walked out with his hands behind his back. Hua Wuxiu remained calm on the surface as he heard the exclamations and the gazes of tens of thousands of people. However, the corners of his mouth curled up into a faint smile. The situation was as he had expected. His trump card had been completely perfected, and it had even helped him break the record. He looked at Yi Guqin and said calmly, "Dugu Wubai, it seems that I'm going to win back 10% in the ancient sword tomb." Hua Wuxiu had said that he would compete with Yi Guqin again in the ancient sword tomb at the end of the 5 academies competition. Now, it seemed that he had indeed won back 1 round. However, Yi Guqin was still sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, shrouded in the light, and focused on comprehending and cultivating. He did not respond to Hua Wuxiu at all. Hua Wuxiu shook his head with a cold expression, and did not say anything. Not far away, Shangguan Jingshan Yinju and the others said sarcastically, "This Dugu Wubai is so arrogant when he wins, and pretends to be deaf and dumb when he loses. He really has the prestige of a natural saint." Yes, is this the reputation of a natural saint? Ouyang Fengyan sneered. With these people taking the lead, the other prodigies from the aristocratic families also mocked and ridiculed. For a moment, all kinds of unpleasant words were said. The faces of the Sacred Cliff College disciples flushed red. Yi Guqin defeated all the prodigies in the 5 academies competition. Why didn't these people mock him? Now he had to endure such ridicule just because he was slightly inferior. Enough! Suddenly, a voice sounded, and the surroundings quieted down. A figure stood up. It was Jian Jinghong. He was one of the most prestigious people in the Sword Dynasty. Therefore, the prodigies from the aristocratic families were also a little afraid of him. Jian Jinghong raised his sword-like eyebrows and said to Hua Wuxiu, "Hua Wuxiu, you're not the only one who can create his own sword technique." After saying that, Jian Jinghong also stepped forward and placed his hand on the heavenly Dao tablet. The next moment he was also pulled into the space of the heavenly Tao tablet. As expected, Jian Jinghong has the embryonic form of the heavenly Tao sword intent. It's more likely that he can create his own sword technique. The prodigies from the itinerant cultivator camp were also shocked. The expressions of the people from Sacred Cliff College eased a little, but they were still not very happy. After all, Jian Jinghong was only helping them out. They were more willing to see Yi Guchen slap the faces of the aristocratic family's prodigies. However, under such circumstances, even the people from Sacred Cliff College felt that Yi Guchen probably did not have much time left. In the blink of an eye, another 2 days passed. There were only 4 days left before the ancient sword tomb closed. At a certain moment, the heavenly Tao tablet trembled. A white brilliance surged out and rushed into the sky. It's coming! Everyone inside and outside the ancient sword tomb stared intently. 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet. Under everyone's gaze, the white light pillar finally stopped at about 700 feet. Hiss! Many gasps could be heard from all directions. Not only did Jian Jinghong create his own sword technique, but its power and complexity were even more powerful than Hua Wuxiao's. Is this the power of having a sword intent at the creation level? What a monstrous talent! Everyone exclaimed. Only someone like Jian Jinghong is worthy of being my target, Suki Miyazaki. Suki Miyazaki's delicate body trembled slightly, and her eyes were filled with shock. Jian Jinghong's performance was indeed stunning. Even Hua Wuxiao was overshadowed by him. She then glanced at Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen was still sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, like an old monk meditating. As expected, there's still a gap between Dugu Wubai and Jian Jinghong, Suki Miyazaki thought to herself. How is it, Hua Wuxiao? Jian Jinghong's figure reappeared in front of the heavenly Tao tablet, and his lips curled into a smile. You're not much better than me. Let's see how it goes in the battle for the sword heir. Hua Wuxiao was expressionless. Although Jian Jinghong's performance was slightly better than his, it was still acceptable. Moreover, he had already overshadowed Yi Guchen. Hua Wuxiao was satisfied. Time passed by. Soon there was only 1 day left before the ancient sword tomb closed. And Yi Guchen was still as unmoving as a rock. It's over. Hua Wuxiao smiled faintly. Yi Guchen was still a human, not a god. Miracles could not happen every time. What a pity. Jian Jinghong was also slightly disappointed. As for the people from Sacred Cliff College, although they were not dejected, they were still in low spirits. The geniuses from the aristocratic families were full of mockery. Many times, when you were creating miracles, as long as you did something slightly wrong, you would immediately be belittled and looked down on. Haha, Beixian Elder, prepare the token. The ancient sword tomb is about to close. Elder Hua Emo said with a smile. I don't need you to remind me, Beixian Elder said unhappily. And at this moment, Yi Guchen, who had been meditating like an old monk, trembled slightly and opened his eyes. There's only 1 day left. It should be enough. Yi Guchen muttered to himself. Chapter 1036. Outside the ancient sword tomb, Hua Emo, Yinli, and the other academy elders stepped forward and took their positions. They were waiting for the day to end, so that they could close the ancient sword tomb. Beixian Elder let out a long sigh and stepped forward helplessly. However, at that moment, a commotion broke out within the ancient sword tomb. Outside the ancient sword tomb, everyone was attracted by the clamor and turned their attention to it. It seems to be Dugu Wubai. He finally woke up from his meditation. What's the use of waking up now? He has already missed the best opportunity. Everyone was discussing fervently. At that moment, beside the heavenly Tao stone tablet, Yi Guchen finally opened his eyes and stood up. The corners of his mouth curved into a faint smile. He was obviously very satisfied with his cultivation over the past few days. The time Yi Guchen spent beside the heavenly Tao stone tablet was far less than the other prodigies. In fact, it was even less than Hua Wuxiao and Jian Jinghong. However, Yi Guchen received the most support from the heavenly Tao stone tablet. In addition, he had the help of his sword devil insight and the ancient tree of enlightenment. He had made great progress in his cultivation during this period of time. He had already comprehended most of the 4 forms of the 10,000 God tribulation, Heaven's End. Once he entered the divine dwelling stage, he would be able to use this move. Yi Guqin could only use 108 leaves of the reincarnation, Sword Lotus previously. Now he could use 240 leaves, which was not far from mastering 360 leaves. Yi Guqin had also comprehended 2 or 3 forms of the 8 extremities reincarnation sword technique, and could use them directly. Finally, the most important thing was naturally the ultimate sword domain. Yi Guqin could now completely stack 2 sword Dao domains together. It was very stable. Yi Guqin had also gained a preliminary understanding of the fusion of 3 sword domains. He only needed to perfect it in the future. It could be said that Yi Guqin had gained a lot from the ancient sword tomb this time. How could he not be happy? Congratulations, senior brother Dugu. You've made great progress in your cultivation. The surrounding Sacred Cliff College disciples, as well as some individual cultivators, saluted Yi Guqin. Even if Yi Guqin was unable to create his own sword technique, being able to comprehend the proud divine continent's 8 extreme reincarnation sword art was already shocking enough. Dugu Wubai, to be able to comprehend Alliance Master Proud Divine Prefecture's ultimate technique, you truly are capable. Jian Jinghong smiled. The prodigies from the itinerant cultivator camp had a tacit understanding, and did not mention anything about creating their own sword techniques. Dugu Wubai, there's only 1 day left before the ancient sword tomb closes. Let's make some preparations and head out. Ling Moyin stepped forward and said. The reason why she said this was because she didn't want Yi Guqin to be affected by gossip. Dugu Wubai, are you leaving just like that? Shengguan Jingshan said coldly. You're a bit like a dog with its tail between its legs. Ouyang Fingyun's tone was bitter. During the 5 Academies tournament, they had ganged up on Yi Guqin, and failed in the end. Their reputation had been ruined. Now they naturally wanted to take revenge. That's right, Dugu Wubai. Isn't there still 1 day left? Maybe you can create your own sword technique? Inju sneered. Immediately, there was a lot of gossip among the prodigies from the aristocratic families. Their words were full of contempt and sarcasm for Yi Guqin. You. The rogue prodigies glared at them angrily. Dugu Wubai, although there's only 1 day left, it's fine to give it a try. At least it's not a wasted trip, Hua Wuxiu said with a calm expression. Although it didn't seem to be sarcastic, it made people feel uncomfortable. Yi Guqin tilted his head slightly and glanced at Hua Wuxiu, Shengguan Jingshan, and the others with some doubts in his eyes. You guys are very strange, Yi Guqin said. What do you mean? Hua Wuxiu's eyes narrowed. Which ear of yours heard that I'm leaving? Yi Guqin asked. You mean you're really going to try? Inju sounded extremely surprised. He had said that just to make fun of Yi Guqin. He didn't think that Yi Guqin would embarrass himself. After all, creating one's own sword technique in a day was almost impossible. Isn't there still 1 day left? Yi Guqin shook his head slightly. He couldn't understand what these people were thinking. He stepped forward and approached the heavenly Dao tablet. This scene was also seen by the people outside the ancient sword tomb. What's going on? Is Dugu Wubai approaching the heavenly Dao tablet? There's only 1 day left. What else does he want to do? The people outside the ancient sword tomb looked at each other with puzzlement. Could it be that Yi Guqin just wanted to see the space of the heavenly Dao tablet? But if he didn't have the opportunity and inspiration to create his own sword technique, he wouldn't be able to enter. Even Elder Beixian widened his eyes in shock, and his eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. What is Dugu doing? Beixian Elder was also puzzled. Haha, interesting. Is he trying to save some face? Or is Dugu Wubai able to create his own sword technique in 1 day? Huaimo, Li, and the other elders couldn't help but laugh when they heard this, because this kind of behavior was really overestimating himself. Are you done? Beixian Elder frowned and shouted. He was extremely disgusted by Huamo's arrogant behavior. What's wrong? You won't let me say it? If Dugu Wubai can really create his own sword technique today, then this old man will kneel in front of you and kowtow 3 times. Huaimo was in a good mood and couldn't help but exclaim, "You!" Beixian elder blew his beard and stared at him, but he didn't say anything. Because this was really impossible. Because of Yi Guchen's actions, the ancient sword tomb was in an uproar. Yi Guchen looked calm and composed. He walked into the heavenly Tao tablet, and slowly placed his hand on it. If there was an opportunity and ability to create his own sword technique, the heavenly Tao tablet would pull him into its space. If there wasn't, he would be bounced off. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. Just as the crowd from the aristocratic families were about to smile mockingly, a voice suddenly rang out. A ray of light surged and Yi Guchen's figure was pulled into it. Everyone was stunned. Everyone was petrified. The sneers on the faces of Shangguan Jingshan and the others froze like ice cubes. Hua Wuxiao's heart skipped a beat. Yi Guchen actually had the ability to create his own sword technique. Some of the prodigies from the ancient sword families looked at each other and swallowed their saliva. Huaimo was even more stunned. He rubbed his eyes as if he didn't see clearly. He was still in a daze. Even Beixian elder couldn't believe it. However, in an instant, a glimmer of hope appeared in his eyes. In the sky, Saber 9 smiled faintly when he saw this. When Brother Dugu surprises everyone, that's when he's going to create another miracle. No, that's impossible. It must be a coincidence. Even if he enters the space of the heavenly Tao tablet, he might not be able to comprehend it. After all, he only has 1 day. Huaimo said as if he was comforting himself. He wasn't the only one. Most of the people thought the same. The time was too short. Even someone as talented as Jian Jinghong took several days to comprehend the heavenly Tao tablet. Furthermore, he spent more time in the heavenly Tao tablet than Yi Guchen. Are you trying to be mysterious again? Hua Wuxiao didn't want to believe it. Shangguan Jingshan, Yinju and Ouyang Fengyan didn't believe it either. Chapter 1037. Not to mention Yi Guchen's enemies. Even some of the Sacred Cliff College disciples were in disbelief. It wasn't that they didn't believe in Yi Guchen's ability, but that he didn't have enough time. If Yi Guchen had more time to meditate like Jian Jinghong and Hua Wuxiao, many people would believe that Yi Guchen could create his own swordsmanship. However, 1 day was the limit of the Taiji limit. Since ancient times, there had never been such a record in the Sword Dynasty. No matter what, at least Senior Dugu proved himself. He has the ability to create his own swordsmanship. Some of the Sacred Cliff College disciples said. It's just a waste of effort. The geniuses regained their composure. If Yi Guchen had a few more days, he might have succeeded. But unfortunately, inside and outside the ancient sword tomb, everyone had different thoughts. Some were curious, some were watching a show, some were looking forward to it. At this moment, Yi Guchen had entered a mysterious place. The surrounding void was grotesque and variegated, with thousands of colors. It was very strange. Is this the space inside the heavenly Tao stone tablet? Yi Guchen muttered. The moment he entered this place, he felt a special Taoist rhyme. In his mind, it was as if thousands of inspirations emerged. All kinds of sword techniques and martial arts flashed in his consciousness. In this heavenly Tao space, Yi Guchen's thinking was indeed more than 10 times sharper. Because of this, he had more opportunities to create his own swordsmanship. My chaotic spiritual sea is different from ordinary people's. Maybe I can get more support. Yi Guchen thought. He immediately activated his chaotic spiritual sea, and his chaotic soul power spread out. As his chaotic soul power spread, Yi Guchen's thinking became sharper, and his inspirations increased. It's really effective. Yi Guchen was excited. The support he received in this heavenly Tao space was indeed related to the strength of his soul power. Not only was Yi Guchen's sea of consciousness far superior to ordinary people, but he also possessed the rare primal chaos soul power. For example, if Jian Jinghong and Hua Wuxiao were to receive a 10-fold increase in the heavenly Tao space, they would receive a 10-fold increase. But now, Yi Guchen had received an increase of 20 times, or even 30 to 40 times. With such a boost, it was not impossible for Yi Guchen to create his own swordsmanship within a day. Next, I need to decide on the direction of my self-created swordsmanship, Yi Guchen muttered to himself. In fact, before coming to the ancient sword tomb, Yi Guqin had already decided to create his own sword technique. Having made up his mind, Yi Guqin closed his eyes and began to comprehend. In his mind, a hazy, immortal-like figure appeared. It was Situ Hongxue. Creating one's own swordsmanship required an opportunity. Even some Sword Dao grandmasters, who had been immersed in Sword Dao for hundreds of years, could not create swordsmanship for no reason. Those top-notch Sword Dao grandmasters who created their own swordsmanship would carefully comprehend the various states of the world and the ups and downs of life. In short, for a true Sword Dao grandmaster, the Sword Dao was the Sword Dao. It was the Sword Dao grandmaster's comprehension of the various states of the world. And for Yi Guqin, the thing that touched him the most at this stage was undoubtedly his love and hate relationship with Situ Hongxue. Moreover, Yi Guqin had also created his own sword technique, Sentimental Heavens, for this reason. Sentimental Heavens was only a scattered move. However, Yi Guqin felt that this move could be expanded further. Therefore, Yi Guqin decided to continue comprehending it in depth. After the elite meeting, Situ Hongxue left a hairpin with the words Sentimental Heavens, Old Heavens engraved on it. In the heavenly wasteland plains, Situ Hongxue was resolute in facing Grandma Withered Flower's attack. She placed the tip of the sword horizontally across her jade neck and said those words. Having seen the vast ocean, water is no more. Apart from Mount Wu, clouds are no more. Scenes from the past surfaced in his mind once again. A mysterious aura enveloped Yi Guqin's entire body. All sorts of insights surged into his mind. Just as Yi Guqin was immersed in this enlightenment, time passed bit by bit in the outside world. A day's time was too short, and it passed in the blink of an eye. In the ancient sword tomb, many of the prodigies did not choose to leave. Instead, they stayed where they were, waiting to witness the final outcome. Although to most of them, the outcome was self-evident. It's indeed a waste of time. Ouyang Fengyan and the other prodigies could not help but laugh when they saw that the Heaven Dao stone tablet did not move at all. Although Wuxia did not say anything, the faint smile on his face revealed his inner thoughts. On the other hand, Ling Maoyin, Han Lingxian, and the others were very nervous. Although Mu Xingzu believed in Yi Guqin's ability the most, she was also a little nervous at this moment. I'm afraid even Jian Jinghong can't do it in a day's time. Suki Miyazaki was not very optimistic. Outside the ancient sword tomb, Huamo's mood changed from the initial nervousness to calmness. Now he was vaguely amused. How ridiculous. I was actually shocked just now. Thinking back to his reaction when he saw Yi Guqin enter the Heaven Dao stone tablet, Huamo felt that it was ridiculous. His worries were groundless. Beixian Elder was silent. The glimmer of hope that had just surged in his heart was slowly extinguished as time passed, like a candle in the wind. Maybe it's still too much? Beixian Elder sighed. Time passed and soon it was time to close the ancient sword tomb. Old man Beixian, it's about time. Huayamo smiled proudly. Sigh. Beixian Elder's face stiffened, but he still took out the token. Prodigies in the ancient sword tomb. The tomb is about to close. Get ready to come out. Elder Ainli shouted. As for Yi Guqin, when they activated the sealing array, the Heaven Dao stone tablet would naturally expel him. Of course, that also meant that Yi Guqin had failed. It's over. The prodigies on the side of the aristocratic families relaxed. They were really afraid that there would be a twist in the end. Boring. Hua Wuxiu shook his head lightly. Although it was expected that they would surpass Yi Guqin, it was still a little boring. What's there to be proud of? Seeing the prodigies of the aristocratic families, the disciples of Sacred Cliff College felt a little aggrieved. However, they had no choice. After all, Yi Guqin was still a little weaker. Then, all the prodigies turned around and prepared to leave the ancient sword tomb. However, at that moment, all the prodigies in the ancient sword tomb felt the ground beneath their feet tremble. What's going on? All the prodigies looked at each other. This tremor is coming from the Heaven Dao stone tablet. Suddenly, a prodigy from Sacred Cliff College exclaimed. Then all the prodigies turned around and stared at the Heaven Dao stone tablet. Jian Jinghong, Hua Wuxiu, Shengguan Jingshan, Inju Oyangfengyan Muxingzu Lingmain, Xuanlian. All the prodigies turned around and stared at the stone tablet. The Heaven Dao stone tablet made a rumbling sound as if the great Dao was rumbling. Many natural Dao patterns appeared on the surface of the stone tablet. They contained endless brilliance, as if they were accumulating power. Could it be? Hua Wuxiao's heart sank. Shengguan Jingshan Inju, and the rest were also stunned. They kept repeating the word impossible in their hearts. Outside the ancient sword tomb, everyone also saw the abnormality of the Heaven Dao stone tablet. It can't be, it can't be. The smile on Huamo's face froze before he could retract it. Beixian Elder was stunned at first. Then his eyes filled with ecstasy. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.